When Cole Banister rode into Redemption Valley, he thought he was escaping his blood-soaked past. But some sins follow you like shadows, and when the Apache girl emerged from the river, that fateful morning her desperate words would bind two broken souls in a covenant that would either save them both or destroy everything they'd ever loved. Welcome to a tale of redemption carved from violence where the desert wind carries secrets, and every sunset could be your last. Stay with me until the end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The dust devil that followed Cole Banister into Redemption Valley seemed to carry the ghosts of every man he'd killed. 23 souls by his last count, each one carved into his memory like notches on a gunfighter's belt. The morning sun painted the desert in shades of amber and rust, but to Cole's eyes everything looked the color of dried blood. His horse, a steel-gray Mustang named Justice, picked her way carefully down the rocky trail that serpentined into the valley below. The irony of the horse's name wasn't lost on him. Justice was the one thing Cole had been running from for the better part of 3 years. Ever since that final gunfight in Abilene, when he'd looked into the dying eyes of a young outlaw and seen his own soul staring back. "Easy, girl," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. Days would pass sometimes without Cole speaking to another human being. The silence had become his confession booth, his penance, his prayer. The valley spread before them like a green wound in the desert's flesh. Cottonwoods lined a silver thread of river, and scattered homesteads dotted the landscape like dice thrown by a careless god. It looked peaceful enough, but Cole had learned not to trust appearances. He'd seen too many peaceful places turn into graveyards when the wrong wind started blowing. The realtor in Santa Fe had called it a land of opportunity. Cole preferred to think of it as his last chance. At 42, he was too old to keep running, too tired to keep fighting, and too haunted to keep pretending he was anything other than a broken man looking for a place to break down in private. The homestead he'd purchased sight unseen sat on a low rise overlooking the river. According to the deed, it had belonged to a man named Samuel Fletcher, a preacher who'd tried to build a church and ended up building a coffin instead. The details were vague, but then again, details in places like Redemption Valley usually were. As Justice carried him closer to his new home, Cole caught sight of movement near the riverbank, a flash of color that didn't belong to the landscape, blue and white like a summer sky torn into strips. He reined in his horse and reached instinctively for the Colt .45 at his hip, a gesture so automatic he barely noticed it anymore. The movement came again, and this time he could make out a figure by the water's edge. A woman kneeling beside the river with her back to him. Her long black hair caught the morning light like silk, and something about the way she moved, careful, deliberate, almost ritualistic, made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Cole had learned to trust his instincts. They'd kept him alive through a war that had killed most of his friends, and a decade of violence that had claimed his soul. Those same instincts were screaming at him now, but not in warning. In recognition. He'd seen this before, not this exact scene, but something like it. In a dream that had haunted him for months, where a dark-haired woman by a river had spoken words that changed everything. He'd always dismissed it as the fevered imagination of a guilty mind, but now, "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. Justice nickered softly, as if in agreement. Cole urged her forward down the slope toward the river. The woman seemed unaware of his approach, lost in whatever ritual she was performing. As he drew closer, he could see she was Apache, her clothing a mix of traditional buckskin and what looked like stolen or traded white woman's dress. The combination should have looked ridiculous, but on her it seemed natural, as if she belonged to both worlds and neither. She was young, maybe 25, with the kind of beauty that would have stopped traffic in a civilized place. But there was nothing civilized about the way she moved, nothing soft about the steel in her spine or the careful precision of her hands as she worked. Cole was 20 yards away when she spoke without turning around. "You're the one they call the preacher's ghost." Her voice carried clearly across the water, accented but confident. Cole felt his blood chill. He hadn't used that name in 3 years, hadn't heard it spoken since he'd left Kansas with half the territory's bounty hunters on his trail. "You've got me confused with someone else, miss," he said, but his hand stayed near his gun. Now she did turn, and Cole felt the world tilt sideways. Her face was exactly as he'd seen it in his dreams, high cheekbones, dark eyes that seemed to see straight through him, and a mouth that looked like it was carved from stone and shadow. But it was the recognition in her gaze that nearly stopped his heart. "No," she said simply, "I don't." She rose gracefully to her feet, water dripping from her hands. In the morning light, Cole could see what she'd been doing. She'd been washing something in the river, a long, curved knife that now gleamed like liquid silver. "My name is Aiyana," she continued. "In your language it means eternal blossom, though I suspect you'll find little blooming about what's to come." Cole kept his distance, every instinct telling him to ride away, to put as many miles as possible between himself and this woman who knew names he'd tried to bury. But something stronger than instinct held him in place, a pull he couldn't name, like gravity or destiny or the inexorable draw of a man toward his fate. "What do you want?" he asked. Aiyana smiled, and it was like watching winter flowers bloom in hell. "Want," she repeated. "I want what any woman wants, preacher's ghost. I want to live, and for that to happen, you're going to have to marry me." The words hit Cole like a physical blow. He actually swayed in the saddle, justice stepping nervously beneath him. "What? You heard me." Aiyana's voice carried no trace of humor, no suggestion that this was anything but deadly serious. "You'll marry me or we'll both be dead before the moon turns full again." Cole tried to find his voice, tried to process what he was hearing. In all his years of violence and strangeness, he'd never encountered anything quite like this. "Lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but no game." She lifted the knife, and sunlight ran along its edge like liquid fire. "Blood oath, sacred promise. I saw you in the water, Cole Banister. I saw you in dreams and visions, in the smoke of burning sage and the flight of ravens. You're the one the spirits sent." "Spirits don't send anybody," Cole said flatly. "Spirits are just what people call the wind when they're too scared to admit they're alone." Aiyana studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes unreadable. "You carry 23 souls in your shadow," she said quietly. 23 men you've killed. Their ghosts follow you like wolves, and you can feel them watching when you try to sleep. Cole's blood turned to ice water. There was no way she could know that. No way anyone could know the exact number unless— "The last one was in Abilene," she continued. "A boy named Tommy Reeves, 19 years old, barely old enough to shave. You shot him through the heart, and he died calling for his mother." The Colt was in Cole's hand before he realized he'd drawn it, the familiar weight, both comfort and condemnation. "How do you know that—" "I told you, I saw you in the water." Aiyana seemed unconcerned by the gun pointed at her chest. "I've been waiting for you, Cole Banister, waiting and watching and preparing, because you're the only one who can save us both from what's coming." "Us both from what?" "From him." She pointed east toward the far end of the valley, where a sprawling ranch house sat like a spider in the center of its web. Even from this distance, Cole could see it was built for intimidation, too large, too grand a monument to power in a place where power meant everything. "William Harrington, the man who owns this valley and everything in it, including me." Cole lowered his gun but didn't holster it. "If you're his property, what are you doing running free? He thinks I'm dead." Aiyana's smile turned sharp as her blade. "My people, the Chiricahua, we have a saying, sometimes the only way to live is to die first. I died 3 months ago, Cole Banister, fell into the river during a storm, my body swept away by the current. At least that's what everyone believes. But you survived. I survived. Been hiding in the caves up in the Dragoon Mountains, watching and waiting. Harrington killed my family, destroyed my village, took me as his entertainment. But dead women tell no tales, and ghosts can do things the living cannot. Cole felt the familiar weight of inevitability settling on his shoulders, like a vulture. He'd come to Redemption Valley to escape his past, but it seemed his past had been waiting for him all along. "What makes you think I'm the man to help you?" he asked. "Because you're already dead too." Aiyana sheathed her knife in one smooth motion. "The Cole Banister who rode into this valley died somewhere on the trail behind you. What's left is just a ghost looking for somewhere to rest. But maybe if we help each other, we can both find a way back to the living." Justice shifted restlessly beneath him, sensing his rider's agitation. Cole had always prided himself on reading people, on knowing friend from enemy at a glance. But Aiyana was something else entirely, a puzzle written in a language he didn't understand, speaking truths that cut too close to the bone for comfort. "Assuming I was fool enough to believe any of this," he said slowly, "what exactly are you proposing? Marriage, real and legal and binding. You need a reason to stay in this valley instead of drifting through like smoke. I need protection that even Harrington won't dare violate. Together we might both find what we're looking for." "And what am I looking for?" "Redemption," she said simply. "Same as everyone else who ends up in a place named for it." Cole studied her face, searching for deception and finding only determination. Whatever game she was playing, she believed in it completely. That didn't make it any less insane. "You're asking me to marry a stranger," he said. "I'm asking you to marry a ghost, which, considering you're one yourself, seems appropriate." Despite everything, the strangeness of the situation, the danger he could feel lurking just beneath the surface, Cole found himself almost smiling. There was something about Aiyana's directness that appealed to him, something clean and honest after years of lies and half-truths. "What happens if I say no?" "Then you ride to your homestead, try to build your new life, and discover that William Harrington doesn't like strangers in his valley, especially strangers with your reputation. You'll be dead inside a week, and I'll be back to hiding in caves until he finds me or I starve. And if I say yes, then we both have a chance to see how this story ends." Cole looked past her to the homestead that was supposed to be his sanctuary. Already he could imagine how it would play out, the same pattern of violence and death that had followed him across half the continent. Maybe Aiyana was right. Maybe the only way to stop running was to turn and fight. "There are things you don't know about me," he said. "Things that might change your mind. I know you killed a man's son at Gettysburg. I know you've spent 3 years trying to drink away the sound of dying boys calling for their mothers. I know you haven't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since you left Kansas." Aiyana stepped closer, her dark eyes never leaving his. "I know you're tired, Cole Banister. Tired of running, tired of killing, tired of carrying ghosts you can't bury. So am I." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. He was tired, bone-deep, soul-weary, exhausted, tired of moving from place to place like a leaf on the wind, tired of seeing threat in every shadow and death in every stranger's eyes. "Marriage is a sacred thing," he said, though he wasn't sure why. He'd never been particularly religious, despite his nickname. "So is survival." Aiyana held out her hand. "What do you say, ghost ready to try living again?" Cole stared at her outstretched hand for a long moment, weighing madness against destiny, isolation against alliance. Justice snorted and stamped as if urging him to make a decision. Finally, he swung down from the saddle and took her hand in his. Her skin was warm and calloused, real as anything he'd ever touched. "All right," he said, "but we do this properly. Find a preacher, sign papers, make it legal. There's a circuit preacher comes through town every month. Samuel Morrison, good man, honest as they come. He'll be here in 3 days. 3 days. Cole nodded slowly. That's not much time to plan a wedding. It's not much time to plan anything, Aiyana agreed, but it's what we have. She released his hand and stepped back, suddenly businesslike. You should know there'll be resistance. Harrington has eyes and ears everywhere. The moment he learns you're here, really here, and planning to stay, he'll move against you. Let him try. Don't underestimate him, Cole. He's not just some frontier strongman. He's smart, connected, and absolutely ruthless. He owns the sheriff, the mayor, half the merchants in town. Cross him, and you'll find yourself facing more than just hired guns. Cole checked his Colt habit more than nervousness. I've faced worse. Have you ever faced a man who killed your son? The words stopped Cole cold. What? William Harrington's boy, Lieutenant James Harrington, 3rd Pennsylvania Volunteers. You put a bullet through his heart at Gettysburg, July 2nd, 1863. The shot that started your reputation as the preacher's ghost. Memory hit Cole like a physical blow, a young officer on horseback trying to rally his men in the face of a Confederate charge. Cole had been part of Bourdon's sharpshooters, then a sniper whose job was to pick off enemy leaders at impossible distances. The shot had been nearly 400 yards, threading between trees and the soldiers to find its mark. He'd celebrated that kill once. It had been the shot that earned him his nickname, the moment when Cole Banister became something more than just another Union soldier. But in the years since, as the war's glory faded into memory and its costs became clear, that celebration had curdled into guilt. How long has he known? Cole asked quietly. Since the moment you bought the Fletcher place. Maybe before. Harrington's got resources you can't imagine, connections that reach all the way to Washington. He's been waiting for you, Cole, planning for you. Then why hasn't he moved against me already? Because he wants to savor it. Harrington isn't just going to kill you, he's going to destroy you. Strip away everything you try to build, everyone you try to protect. Make you suffer the way he's suffered. Cole felt the familiar weight of fate settling around him like a noose. He'd thought he was choosing his own path, but it seemed his path had been chosen for him long ago. So this marriage, he said, it's not just about protection, it's about war. Everything's about war in Redemption Valley, Aiyana replied. The only question is whether you fight it alone or with someone watching your back. Cole looked around the valley at the peaceful river, the distant homesteads, the mountains that rose like cathedral spires against the morning sky. It was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache, the kind of place a man could build a life if he was lucky enough and strong enough to keep it. Tell me about the man who owned my place, he said. Fletcher. Aiyana's expression darkened. Samuel Fletcher was a good man. A preacher like his name suggests, but the kind who practiced what he preached. He came here 5 years ago with his daughter Caroline, planning to build a church and spread the word. Harrington tolerated him at first, thought having a preacher around might add respectability to the valley. What changed? Fletcher started asking questions about the workers who disappeared, the families who sold their land for pennies and moved on in the middle of the night, about the Apache raids that seemed to target only Harrington's enemies. Aiyana's jaw tightened. Fletcher wasn't content to preach salvation on Sundays and ignore damnation the rest of the week. So Harrington killed him, made it look like an accident. Fletcher was found at the bottom of a ravine, his horse spooked and his neck broken. Could have been bad luck, except Fletcher was the best horseman in the territory. That horse wouldn't have thrown him if the ground was on fire. What about his daughter, Caroline? Aiyana's expression softened slightly. She's still here, still fighting. Runs the general store, now tries to keep her father's memory alive. Aiyana paused as if choosing her words carefully. She's important, Cole. To the valley, to the people here. And she'll be important to you whether you want her to be or not. Something in her tone made Cole look at her sharply. Important how? You'll see. Aiyana turned toward the mountains where the sun was climbing higher into a sky the color of forget-me-nots. For now, you should go to your new home, get settled, meet your neighbors, play the part of the tired gunfighter looking for peace. And you, I'll be around, watching, listening, preparing. In 3 days, we'll meet at the church and make this official. Until then, try not to get yourself killed." She started to walk away, moving with the fluid grace of water over stone. Cole called after her, "Aiyana," and she stopped but didn't turn around. "Why me?" he asked. "Really, why not someone else?" For a long moment she was silent. When she spoke, her voice carried across the water like a prayer. "Because," she said, "the spirits told me you were the only one broken enough to understand what needed fixing." Then she was moving again, walking upstream along the riverbank until the cottonwoods swallowed her like smoke. Cole stood alone beside the water justice's reins, heavy in his hand, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He'd come to Redemption Valley looking for peace, and instead found a woman who claimed to be dead, a war he didn't start, and a marriage proposal that sounded more like a suicide pact. Any sane man would mount up and ride out, put as many miles as possible between himself and whatever madness was brewing in this place. But then Cole reflected he'd stopped being sane sometime around his 15th kill. Maybe it was time to try being something else instead. He swung back into the saddle and pointed Justice toward his new home. Whatever waited for him there, peace or war, redemption or damnation, he'd face it the way he'd faced everything else in his life. Head on, gun ready, and with the absolute certainty that someone was going to pay a price before it was over. The question was, who? The Fletcher homestead sat on a gentle rise overlooking the river, positioned to catch both the morning sun and the evening breeze. As Cole approached, he could see it had been built by a man who understood this country. The main house faced east toward the sunrise. The barn and outbuildings were positioned to break the worst of the desert wind, and everything was constructed from local stone and timber that would last generations if properly maintained. It was also clear that the place had been abandoned for months. Weeds choked the kitchen garden. The front porch sagged like a tired old man's shoulders, and several of the outbuilding doors hung askew on their hinges. But the bones of the place were solid, and Cole could see the potential beneath the neglect. He dismounted near the front steps and let Justice drink from the stone trough beside the well. The water was clear and cold, fed by an underground spring that had probably drawn the first settlers to this spot. Cole cupped his hands and drank deeply, tasting minerals and possibility. The front door was locked, but the key was where the realtor had said it would be, under a loose stone in the foundation. Cole turned it in the lock and stepped inside, immediately struck by the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of an empty house, but the heavy stillness of a place where tragedy had lived. The main room was spacious but simple, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and bookshelves lining another. Dust motes danced in the slanted sunlight that streamed through windows that hadn't been cleaned in months. Cole moved through the house slowly, taking inventory. Kitchen well appointed but showing signs of hasty abandonment. Dishes still in the sink, a pot of something long spoiled still on the stove. Bedroom, 2 of them, one clearly belonging to a man, the other to a young woman. In the man's room, Cole found clothes still hanging in the wardrobe and a Bible on the nightstand, its pages marked with slips of paper and margin notes in a careful hand. Study this was where Fletcher had done his real work. The desk was covered with papers, sermons, letters, and what looked like a journal filled with observations about valley life. Cole didn't read them immediately, but he could see they'd been organized by someone who expected to return to them. It was in the study that Cole found the first sign of trouble. A window that had been forced, its lock broken, and the frame splintered. The damage was old, but not repaired, as if whoever had broken in hadn't been concerned about hiding their entry. Cole examined the window more closely and found what he'd expected, boot prints in the dust, signs that someone had searched the room thoroughly. Papers were stacked neatly, but not in the same order as the rest of the house. Someone had been looking for something specific. He was still examining the forced window when he heard the sound of an approaching horse. Cole moved to the front window and watched a rider approach a woman on a chestnut mare, moving with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in this country. Even at a distance, he could see she was beautiful. in the way frontier women often were, practical beauty earned rather than given. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and she wore men's work clothes that couldn't disguise the feminine curves beneath. As she drew closer, Cole could see intelligence in her green eyes and determination in the set of her jaw. This, he realized, must be Caroline Fletcher. She dismounted near the front porch and tied her horse to the rail with practiced efficiency. Then she stood for a moment looking at the house, with an expression Cole couldn't quite read. Sadness maybe, or anger, or some combination of both. Cole opened the front door before she could knock. "Miss Fletcher," he said. She turned to face him, and Cole felt something shift in the air between them. Up close he could see she was probably 30, with the kind of beauty that would improve with age rather than fade. There were laugh lines around her eyes and work calluses on her hands, but also a wariness that spoke of hard-earned wisdom. "Mr. Banister, I presume." Her voice was warm but cautious, with just a trace of an accent that suggested education back east. "I heard you'd arrived." News travels fast in a small valley. Everything travels fast in a small valley. News, gossip, trouble. She looked past him into the house. "May I come in?" "There are some things about this place you should know." Cole stepped aside to let her pass. As she walked by, he caught a hint of lavender and leather, a combination that was somehow perfect for her. Caroline moved through the main room like someone revisiting a beloved but painful memory. She touched the mantelpiece, gently straightened a book that had been knocked askew, righted a picture frame that showed a serious-looking man in clerical collar standing beside a younger version of herself. "My father," she said, noticing Cole's gaze. "Taken last Christmas, just a few months before." She didn't finish the sentence. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Are you?" Caroline turned to face him, and Cole was struck by the directness of her gaze. "Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear?" "I'm saying what I mean. I know what it's like to lose family." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because her expression softened slightly. "Yes, I suppose you would. A man doesn't get a reputation like yours without losing people along the way." Cole felt the familiar stab of discomfort that came whenever someone mentioned his past. "You know about that." "I know about lots of things, Mr. Banister. In a place like this, information is the most valuable currency, and your information is particularly colorful." She moved to the bookshelf and pulled down a volume, Whitman's Leaves of Grass, its pages worn soft with reading. "My father believed in redemption," she said quietly. "He thought everyone deserved a chance to start over, no matter what they'd done before. It's what brought him to this valley, and it's what got him killed." "I heard about the accident." Caroline Ah's laugh was bitter as burnt coffee. "Accident. Yes, that's what they called it. Just like they called it an accident when the Martinez family lost their farm to a flash flood that somehow only affected their land, or when Tom Brennan's cattle got sick and died, but only the ones grazing near the disputed property line." Cole studied her face, seeing anger and grief, and something else, a kind of fierce determination that reminded him of someone. It took him a moment to realize it was Aiyana. "You don't believe it was an accident?" "I know it wasn't. My father was investigating something that threatened powerful people. The night before he died, he told me he'd found proof of what was really happening in this valley, evidence that would expose everything." "What kind of evidence?" Caroline was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the spine of the poetry book. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Financial records, bills of sale, property deeds, shipping manifests, documents that showed how William Harrington was systematically stealing this valley from the people who built it. My father had been collecting them for months, building a case that would have sent Harrington to prison for the rest of his life." "What happened to the evidence?" "That's what I'd like to know." Caroline gestured toward the study. "The night my father died, someone broke into this house, tore the place apart looking for something. When I found it the next morning, all of my father's papers were gone." Cole thought about the forced window, the search desk. All of them, every document that mattered. They left the sermons, the personal letters, anything that didn't relate to Harrington's business dealings. But the evidence my father died for it was gone. Maybe he hid it somewhere else. Maybe. Caroline replaced the book on the shelf with careful precision. Or maybe whoever killed him found what they were looking for. Either way, the truth died with him. Cole was quiet for a moment, processing what she'd told him. It confirmed what Aiyana had said about Harrington's reach and ruthlessness, but it also suggested something else, that Fletcher's death hadn't been as random as it appeared. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. Caroline turned to face him fully, and Cole saw something in her eyes that made his pulse quicken, not fear but recognition, as if she was seeing something in him that he wasn't sure he wanted seen. Because she said simply, "You're going to pick up where my father left off. Whether you know it or not, whether you want to or not. Men like you don't come to places like this to tend gardens and raise chickens. You come because something's calling you, something that won't let you rest until you answer. You don't know anything about me. I know you're the man who killed James Harrington at Gettysburg. I know William Harrington has been waiting 3 years for you to surface so he could have his revenge. And I know you didn't come here by accident." Caroline stepped closer, close enough that Cole could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Before Cole could answer, they both heard the sound of approaching horses, several of them moving fast. Caroline's face went pale and her hand moved instinctively to the small pistol Cole now noticed tucked into her belt. "Harrington's men," she whispered. Cole moved to the window and counted 6 riders approaching at a gallop. They were still a quarter mile away, but coming hard and showing no signs of stopping for a friendly visit. "Is there a back way out?" he asked. "Through the kitchen. There's a trail that leads up into the rocks." Caroline was already moving, her earlier composure replaced by urgent efficiency. "You can reach the high country from there, find somewhere to lay low." "What about you?" "I'll be fine. They won't hurt me. I'm too visible, too well known in town. But you—" She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked back at him. "They didn't come here to talk, Mr. Banister. Whatever Harrington's planning, it starts now." Cole checked his Colt and made sure his rifle was secure in its saddle scabbard. Justice was still outside, and he'd need her if he was going to have any chance of outrunning 6 mounted men across open country. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're still alive tomorrow." Caroline paused. "And Mr. Banister, whatever you're really here for, whatever brought you to this valley, don't let them stop you. My father believed that sometimes one person can make all the difference. I'm starting to think he might have been right." Then she was gone, slipping out the back door with the kind of practiced stealth that spoke of previous experience with unwelcome visitors. Cole waited a few seconds, then followed her into the bright desert morning. Justice nickered softly as he approached, ears pricked toward the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Cole swung into the saddle and urged her toward the rocky trail Caroline had indicated. Behind them he could hear voices, angry, purposeful, getting closer. As they climbed into the rocks above the homestead, Cole looked back once and saw the riders surrounding his new home. Even at a distance he could see they weren't there for a social call. One of them was already dismounting while another held what looked like a torch. "Well, Justice," Cole murmured to his horse, "looks like we picked another fine place to settle down." Justice snorted and picked her way carefully up the rocky trail, away from the valley floor and toward whatever refuge the high country might offer. Behind them, smoke began to rise from the direction of the Fletcher homestead. Cole Banister had come to Redemption Valley looking for peace. Instead, he'd found war, a mysterious woman who claimed the spirits had sent him, and a frontier preacher's daughter who saw something in him he wasn't sure existed anymore. It was, he reflected, going to be an interesting 3 days until the wedding, assuming, of course, he lived that long. The smoke from his burning homestead followed Cole into the high country like a black prayer against the desert sky. Justice picked her way carefully along the narrow trail, that wound between towering red sandstone formations, her hooves finding purchase on rock worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. Behind them, the voices of Harrington's men grew fainter, but Cole knew they wouldn't give up easily. Men like that never did. He found shelter in a natural cave carved into the canyon wall, just large enough for himself and his horse. From this vantage point, he could see most of the valley spread below the silver thread of the river, the scattered homesteads and the dark smudge where his future had been reduced to ash and ember. Should have known it was too good to last, he murmured to Justice, loosening her saddle girth. The horse nicked softly in what might have been agreement or sympathy. Cole settled in to wait for nightfall, using the time to think through what he'd learned. William Harrington wasn't just another frontier strongman, he was systematic, patient, and absolutely ruthless. The kind of man who would burn a stranger's house as a warning, then track him through the desert for the pleasure of finishing the job personally. The kind of man, Cole realized, who might very well have arranged for a certain tired gunfighter to buy a particular piece of property in a remote valley. The coincidence was beginning to feel less like fate and more like manipulation. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, Cole heard the soft whisper of moccasined feet on stone. His hand moved instinctively to his gun, then relaxed as a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Aiyana moved like smoke, given form, appearing and disappearing between the rock formations with the fluid grace of someone who belonged to this country in ways white men never could. She carried a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth and wore the kind of expression that suggested bad news. "You're faster than I expected," she said, settling beside him on the narrow ledge. "Most men would have tried to fight them. Most men don't live long enough to learn when to run." Cole studied her face in the dying light. "You heard about the fire." "I saw it. Harrington's moving faster than I thought he would. Usually he likes to let fear do most of his work before he resorts to open violence." Aiyana unwrapped her bundle, revealing dried meat hardtack and what looked like medicinal herbs. "You must have worried him more than expected, or someone told him something that changed his timeline." Cole accepted the offered food gratefully, realizing he hadn't eaten since dawn. "How did you know where to find me?" "I've been watching the valley for 3 months. Every trail, every hiding place, every way, in and out. When you headed up this canyon, there was really only one place you could go." Aiyana's dark eyes reflected the last light of day. "Besides, the spirits whispered your location." Cole looked at her sharply, but her expression gave nothing away. He was beginning to understand that Aiyana spoke in layers, literal truth, wrapped in mysticism, practical knowledge disguised as supernatural insight. "Caroline Fletcher," he said. "Tell me about her." Something flickered across Aiyana's face, too quick to identify, but unmistakably emotional. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Her connection to her father's work, her relationship with Harrington, why she's still alive when everyone else who opposed him is dead." Cole chewed the jerky thoughtfully. "And why she looked at me like she was seeing a ghost." Maybe because she was. Aiyana was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the valley where lights were beginning to twinkle in windows. "Caroline Fletcher is complicated. Her father was a good man, but he was also naive. He believed truth and righteousness would be enough to defeat evil. Caroline learned better. Meaning she's been building her own case against Harrington ever since her father died, collecting evidence, documenting crimes, preparing for the day when she has enough proof to bring him down." Aiyana's voice carried a note of something that might have been admiration. "She's also been keeping her father's network alive, the people who fed him information, the families who trusted him with their secrets." Cole felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fit together. A network that would be very interested in someone with my particular skills. A network that's been waiting for someone exactly like you. Aiyana turned to face him fully. "Caroline didn't come to your house today by accident, Cole. She's been watching the trail into the valley just as carefully as I have, waiting to see what kind of man would buy the Fletcher place. And what kind of man am I? The kind who makes widows and orphans when he's given no choice. The kind who carries his ghosts like a burden instead of wearing them like trophies. The kind who might actually give a damn about what happens to this valley and the people in it. The assessment was uncomfortably accurate. Cole had always prided himself on being a practical man, someone who did what needed doing without getting tangled up in emotions or idealism. But something about Redemption Valley, or maybe something about the people in it, was making that detachment harder to maintain. "You're asking me to care," he said. "I'm asking you to live. There's a difference." Aiyana pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them in a gesture that made her look younger and more vulnerable. "We're all dead people here, Cole. Caroline died with her father. I died in Harrington's bed. You died in Kansas, or maybe even earlier. The question is whether we stay dead or find a way back. And you think marriage is that way back? I think it's a start, a declaration that we choose to stand together instead of falling separately." Aiyana looked at him with eyes that seemed to hold depths he couldn't fathom. "But it has to be real, Cole, not just a piece of paper or a strategic alliance. If we're going to survive what's coming, we need to trust each other completely." Cole thought about trust, how little of it he had left, how carefully he'd learned to ration it out. Trust was a luxury he'd given up somewhere between his first kill and his last, replaced by the more reliable currencies of fear and firepower. "I don't know if I remember how," he said honestly. "Then we'll learn together." Aiyana reached out and touched his hand, her fingers warm against his skin. 3 days, Cole. 3 days to convince a valley full of frightened people that we're worth believing in. 3 days to prepare for a war that's been building for 5 years. What makes you think we can win? Because we're already dead. That gives us an advantage living people don't have. We can take risks. They can't make sacrifices, they won't. And because— she hesitated as if deciding whether to continue. "Because I've seen how it ends. In dreams, in visions, in the smoke of burning sage. I've seen Harrington fall, seen the valley free, seen something that might be peace settling over this land like morning mist. Dreams aren't prophecy. No, but they're hope. And sometimes hope is enough to make the impossible happen." Cole looked out at the valley again, at the lights that marked human habitation in the vast darkness of the desert. Somewhere down there, William Harrington was planning his next move. Somewhere else, Caroline Fletcher was doing the same, and tomorrow the deadly dance between them would continue. "Tell me about the church," he said. "Where we're supposed to be married." "Old Spanish mission built in the 1600s, when this was still Mexico. Father Samuel Morrison holds services there once a month when he makes his circuit through the territory. Good man, honest as sunrise, but he doesn't understand what he's walking into." "Will Harrington try to stop the ceremony?" "Count on it. He can't afford to let us make that kind of public alliance, especially not in a church. Too many witnesses, too much symbolism." Aiyana's expression grew thoughtful. "But he'll be careful about it. Morrison has connections back east, political protection that even Harrington won't want to challenge directly. So he'll try to stop us before we get there. Or during the ceremony itself. Make it look like an accident, a robbery gone wrong, anything that doesn't point back to him." Aiyana stood and moved to the cave entrance, scanning the darkness below. "We'll need to be very careful and very smart." Cole joined her at the cave mouth, feeling the cool night air on his face. The stars were coming out now, brilliant points of light in the clear desert sky. He'd spent enough nights under stars like these to know they were beautiful and indifferent, shining equally on the just and the unjust, the living and the dead. "There's something else," Aiyana said quietly. "Something I haven't told you about Caroline." "What?" "Her father's evidence, the documents that disappeared the night he died. Caroline knows where they are." Cole felt his pulse quicken. "How?" "Because she's the one who took them. The night before her father's accident, he gave her a key and told her that if anything happened to him, she should retrieve a package he'd hidden and keep it safe until she found someone she could trust completely. Aiyana's voice was barely audible above the desert wind. She's been carrying that burden for months, waiting for the right person to share it with. And she thinks I'm that person. She thinks you might be, but she won't know for sure until she sees how you handle what's coming. Aiyana turned to face him. The evidence Fletcher collected, it's enough to destroy Harrington completely. Financial crimes, murder, conspiracy, connections to criminal enterprises that reach all the way to territorial government. But it's also enough to get everyone involved killed if it falls into the wrong hands. Cole thought about Caroline Fletcher's green eyes, the way she'd looked at him, as if trying to see into his soul. Now he understood what she'd been looking for, not just courage or skill, but the kind of moral certainty that would make a man worth dying for. Where are the documents hidden? I don't know. Caroline never told me, and I never asked. That kind of information is too dangerous to share unless absolutely necessary. Aiyana moved back into the cave, beginning to gather her things. But I think after today, she'll be ready to trust someone with the truth. You're leaving. I have preparations to make, people to see, plans to set in motion. If we're really going to do this, we'll need allies, weapons, and escape routes. Aiyana paused at the cave entrance. Can you find your way back to town? I'll manage. Be careful, Cole. Harrington's men will be watching every trail, every approach. They want you alive for now, but that could change if you give them an excuse. She started to leave, then turned back one more time. There's a cantina on the east side of town, Maria's place. Caroline will be there tomorrow night, along with some of the other people you'll need to meet. People who've been waiting for someone like you to give them hope. What if I'm not the man they're hoping for? Then we'll all find out together. Aiyana's smile was sad and beautiful in the starlight. But I don't think that's how this story ends, Cole Banister. I think it ends with something none of us expected. Something that might actually be worth the price we're all going to pay for it. Then she was gone, melting into the darkness like a shadow returning to shadow. Cole stood alone at the cave entrance, listening to the night sounds of the desert and thinking about promises he'd never intended to make. He spent the night in fitful sleep, dreaming of burning houses and laughing ghosts of green eyes and silver knives, of a woman who claimed to be dead, and a valley that promised redemption to anyone brave enough or foolish enough to claim it. When dawn came, painting the canyon walls in shades of rose and gold, Cole saddled Justice and began the careful descent back toward the valley floor. He had 2 days left before his wedding, 2 days to learn whether he was walking toward salvation or damnation. Either way, he was done running. The town of Redemption Creek huddled against the base of the mountains like a collection of buildings that had wandered into the desert and decided to stay. It was larger than Cole had expected, maybe 300 souls, enough to support a main street lined with the usual frontier establishments: general store, saloon, blacksmith, hotel, and assorted smaller businesses that catered to the needs of ranchers, miners, and the occasional drifter. Cole approached from the north using a roundabout route that kept him off the main trails. Justice picked her way carefully through the scrub brush and arroyos, following deer paths and cattle tracks that would be invisible to anyone not raised in similar country. He left his horse at a small stable run by an ancient Mexican man who asked no questions and accepted payment without comment. The old man's eyes lingered on Cole's gun for a moment, taking in the worn holster and the way the weapon sat naturally at his hip, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "Agua?" the stable-keeper asked, gesturing toward a well. "Gracias," Cole replied, grateful for the cool water after his long ride. The old man studied him while he drank. "You are the one who bought the Fletcher place," he said finally. "It wasn't a question." "Was," Cole corrected. "It burned yesterday." "See, we saw the smoke. Accidents happen often in this valley." The man's tone suggested he found such accidents remarkably convenient. My name is Diego Morales. I knew Samuel Fletcher well. Good man, honest man. He deserved better than what he received. Cole sensed an opening. I'm starting to understand that a lot of good people have received less than they deserved around here. Diego's weathered face creased into something that might have been approval. You understand correctly, senor. The question is, what does a man do with such understanding? Depends on the man, I suppose. See, it does. Diego moved closer, lowering his voice. Tonight, there will be people at Maria's cantina. People who knew your preacher, who believe in what he was trying to accomplish. They would like to meet the man who bought his house. Even knowing what happened to it, especially knowing what happened to it. A man's character is revealed not by his successes, but by how he responds to adversity. Diego's dark eyes were shrewd and knowing. Besides, Senor, fires can be rebuilt. Hope is much harder to replace once it is lost. Cole nodded slowly. I'll be there. Bueno, but be careful, Harrington has eyes everywhere, and he does not like gatherings he cannot control. Diego turned back to Justice, running experienced hands over her legs and checking her hooves. This is a good horse, strong and intelligent. She will serve you well in what is to come. What makes you think anything is coming? Diego's smile was sad and knowing. Because, senor, in this valley something is always coming. The only question is whether it brings justice or merely more suffering. Cole left the stable and made his way into town proper, keeping to the side streets and avoiding the main thoroughfares where he might attract unwanted attention. The town felt different in daylight than it had from a distance, smaller, more fragile, like a collection of hopes and dreams, balanced precariously on the edge of the desert. He needed supplies to replace what had been lost in the fire, but more than that, he needed to understand the geography of power in Redemption Creek. Every frontier town had its own ecosystem of influence and intimidation, and survival often depended on reading those currents correctly. The general store occupied a prime corner location, its windows displaying the kinds of goods that spoke to both necessity and aspiration, practical items like flour and ammunition, alongside more optimistic purchases like bolts of good cloth and children's toys. A small sign above the door read, Fletcher & Co. And Cole realized this must be where Caroline had made her stand after her father's death. A bell chimed as he pushed through the door, and Cole found himself in a space that managed to feel both commercial and homey. The shelves were well stocked and organized with the kind of care that spoke to pride in ownership, and the air carried scents of coffee leather and the indefinable mixture of items that marked a well-run general store. Caroline Fletcher stood behind the counter helping an elderly woman with a selection of fabric. She looked up as Cole entered, and he saw recognition flicker in her green eyes, followed by something that might have been relief. I'll be right with you, she said, but her tone suggested she was as eager to conclude her current transaction as Cole was to speak with her son. Cole browsed the store while he waited, noting the subtle signs of a business under pressure. The ammunition was locked in a case behind the counter, unusual for a frontier store where such items were typically displayed openly. Several shelves showed gaps where merchandise should have been, and the credit ledger he glimpsed showed more entries than cash sales. The elderly woman finally made her selection and left, pressing Caroline's hand with the kind of gesture that spoke to personal affection beyond mere commercial relationship. When they were alone, Caroline moved to the front door and turned the sign from open to closed, though it was barely past noon. Mr. Banister, she said, turning to face him, I was hoping you'd come by. Miss Fletcher, I wanted to thank you for yesterday, the warning the escape route. It saved my life. For which I'm grateful. Dead men make poor allies. Caroline studied his face, and Cole had the uncomfortable sensation of being evaluated. I heard about your house. I'm sorry. Material things can be replaced. Can they? I wonder if you'll feel the same way after you've been here longer. Caroline moved behind the counter again, but her posture remained alert, ready to move quickly if necessary. Harrington has a talent for taking away the things people value most. Houses, land, livestock, loved ones. He understands that controlling what people need is the same as controlling them. Cole thought about his conversation with Aiyana about documents hidden away and networks of resistance. And yet some people resist anyway. Some do, usually not for long. Caroline's expression grew thoughtful. Though there are exceptions, people who find something worth fighting for that's stronger than their fear. What did your father find? The question hung in the air between them like smoke from a distant fire. Caroline was quiet for a long moment, her hands moving restlessly among the items on the counter, straightening things that were already straight, organizing items that were already organized. Truth, she said finally. My father found truth, and it killed him. But it didn't die with him. No, truth is remarkably difficult to kill, even when you murder everyone who knows it. Caroline looked directly at Cole, and he saw steel beneath the surface, beauty, strength forged in fires that would have broken weaker spirits. The question is, what does a man do when he learns the truth? Does he act on it, or does he decide it's too dangerous to know? Before Cole could answer, they both heard the sound of approaching horses, several of them moving at the deliberate pace of men who weren't in a hurry because they knew their quarry had nowhere to run. Caroline's face went pale, but her voice remained steady. Back room, she said quietly. There's a door that leads to the alley. Cole shook his head. Running didn't work yesterday. Maybe it's time to try something else. These aren't men you want to face in an open fight. Not here, not now. Then I won't fight them. I'll talk to them. Cole checked his gun, ensuring it was loose in its holster, but not drawn. Sometimes conversation can be more effective than violence, and sometimes it can get you killed just as quickly. The door chimed again as 3 men entered the store. Cole recognized the type, immediately hired muscle with just enough intelligence to follow orders and just enough meanness to enjoy their work. They wore guns like other men wore hats, casual and comfortable, and they moved with the kind of practiced coordination that spoke to experience working together. The leader was a tall, lean man with the kind of mustache that suggested vanity and the kind of eyes that suggested its absence. His companions flanked him, automatically positioning themselves to cover the exits and provide crossfire if things went badly. Miss Fletcher, the leader said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that managed to be both polite and threatening. Lovely day, isn't it? Mr. Garrett, Caroline replied, her tone carefully neutral. What can I do for you? Well, we were hoping to meet your customer here. Word is he's new to the valley, and Mr. Harrington likes to welcome newcomers personally. Garrett's smile never reached his eyes. Neighborly gesture, you understand. Cole stepped away from the counter, moving to where he had room to maneuver if conversation proved insufficient. I'm Cole Banister, and you are Frank Garrett, foreman of the Harrington Ranch. These are my associates, Jim Stevens and Bobby Clark. Garrett's tone remained conversational, but his hand rested near his gun. We heard you had some trouble yesterday, house fire, terrible thing. Mr. Harrington wanted to extend his condolences and see if there was anything he could do to help. That's very considerate of him. Oh, Mr. Harrington's a considerate man, cares deeply about everyone in the valley, wants to make sure they're all safe. Garrett's emphasis on the last word made its meaning clear. In fact, he'd like to invite you out to the ranch for dinner tonight. Give you a chance to get to know each other, discuss your plans for the future. Cole felt the weight of the moment settling around him like a noose. This was the opening move in whatever game Harrington was playing, an offer that wasn't really an offer, an invitation that wasn't really optional. I appreciate the invitation, Cole said carefully, but I've already made plans for this evening. Have you? That's unfortunate. Garrett's smile grew wider and less pleasant. Mr. Harrington was very much looking forward to meeting the man who bought the Fletcher place. He has such interesting stories about the previous owner. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Cole glanced at Caroline and saw her jaw tighten, saw her hands clench into fists at her sides. She understood what was happening here, the same kind of pressure that had eventually killed her father. "I'm sure he does," Cole replied. "Perhaps another time when my schedule is less complicated." "Schedule." Garrett repeated the word as if it amused him. "Yes, I imagine your schedule is quite full. New man in town, so many people to meet, so many arrangements to make. Wedding arrangements, I hear." Cole felt ice form in his veins. If Harrington knew about the wedding, then Aiyana had been right. They were moving faster than expected, tightening the noose before their prey could slip away. "Gossip travels fast in a small town," Cole said. "Oh, this valley's full of gossip. Stories about mysterious Apache women who were supposed to be dead circuit preachers, who ask inconvenient questions, former lawmen who think they can start over somewhere new." Garrett stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conversational murmur. "The thing about gossip, Mr. Banister, is that sometimes it turns out to be true, and when it does well, accidents tend to happen." Caroline moved, then stepping out from behind the counter with the kind of fluid grace that suggested she'd done this before. "I think you gentlemen have made your point," she said. "Mr. Banister has received Mr. Harrington's invitation and will consider it carefully. Now, unless you're planning to buy something, I have work to do." Garrett looked at her with the kind of expression a cat might give a mouse that had grown suddenly bold. "Miss Fletcher, such a pleasure to see you again. How are you adjusting to life without your father's guidance?" "Quite well, thank you." "I'm sure you are. Smart woman like you, I'm sure you understand the importance of choosing one's associates carefully. Some choices lead to prosperity and long life. Others—" He shrugged eloquently. Cole had heard enough. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Garrett and Caroline, his hand resting casually near his gun. "I think Miss Fletcher asked you to leave." "Did she? How interesting." Garrett's eyes never left Cole's face, but his body language shifted subtly, muscles tensing for action. "You know, Mr. Banister, there are two kinds of men who come to places like Redemption Valley. Those who are running from something and those who are looking for something. Which kind are you? The kind who doesn't like threats disguised as conversation." "Threats, I'm hurt, truly. Mr. Harrington and I are simply trying to be neighborly, though I have to say your reputation suggests you might not appreciate neighborliness the way most folks do." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Cole could feel the familiar coldness settling over him, the icy calm that had carried him through dozens of gunfights, the state of mind where time slowed and every detail became crystal clear. "My reputation is just that, reputation. Stories told by people who weren't there about things they don't understand. Is it how fascinating? Because the stories I've heard are quite specific. 23 men, wasn't it? Each one faster than the last. Each one certain he was the one who would finally put down the famous preacher's ghost." Garrett's smile was razor sharp now. "Tell me, do you ever wonder if number 24 might be the one who gets lucky?" Cole's hand moved to his gun, not drawing but making his intentions clear. Only one way to find out. For a moment the store was so quiet Cole could hear his own heartbeat. Garrett's companions had gone very still, hands hovering near their weapons, waiting for a signal from their leader. Caroline stood frozen behind the counter, her green eyes wide but determined. Then Garrett laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Well, well. Maybe the stories are true after all, but today isn't the day for that particular conversation, Mr. Banister. Today is just about extending invitations and getting acquainted." He stepped back, his hand moving away from his gun in a gesture of apparent surrender. His companions followed suit, but their eyes never left Cole's face. "Think about what we discussed," Garrett said as he moved toward the door. "Mr. Harrington is a patient man, but patience has its limits. And in a valley like this, a man needs friends, enemies." He shrugged again. "Well, enemies don't tend to last very long." They left as they had come, with practiced efficiency and implied threat. The bell chimed once as the door closed behind them, a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Cole waited until he was sure they were gone before allowing his hand to move away from his gun. The familiar coldness began to recede, replaced by the warm rush of adrenaline that followed any near violent encounter. "Well," Caroline said quietly, "that could have gone worse." "Could it have? I'm not sure how." "They could have killed you. The fact that they didn't suggests Harrington wants something more than just your death." Caroline moved to the window and watched the three men mount their horses and ride away. "Though I'm not sure that's necessarily good news." Cole thought about what Aiyana had told him about Harrington wanting to savor his revenge, to destroy rather than simply kill. "He knows who I am, knows about the wedding, probably knows about our conversation yesterday. Then we're running out of time." Carolyn turned from the window, and Cole saw something new in her expression. Resolution, perhaps, or the kind of desperate determination that came when all other options had been exhausted. "There's something I need to show you, Mr. Banister, something my father died protecting." "The documents." "Yes, but not here, not now. Too many eyes, too many ears." Carolyn moved to the cash register and began counting money with hands that trembled slightly. "Tonight at Maria's Cantina. There will be others there, people you need to meet if you're really planning to stay and fight." "What makes you think I'm planning to fight?" Caroline looked at him with eyes that seemed much older than her years. "Because you're still here. If you were planning to run, you'd have done it already. Men like you, men with your particular skills, they don't stay in places like this unless they've found something worth dying for." "And what might that be?" "I don't know yet, but I think you're going to find out tonight." Cole spent the remainder of the afternoon moving through Redemption Creek, like a man learning the steps to a deadly dance. Every shopkeeper he spoke with had the same haunted look in their eyes, the same careful way of choosing words that suggested conversations conducted under the shadow of invisible threats. The baker spoke in whispers about flour shipments that arrived spoiled only for those who fell behind on their protection payments. The blacksmith's hands shook slightly as he described horses that came up lame after their owners asked too many questions about certain ranch operations. By the time evening shadows began stretching across the dusty streets, Cole understood that Harrington's control over the valley wasn't maintained through violence alone, though violence was certainly part of it. It was sustained through a web of economic dependence, social pressure, and the kind of systematic intimidation that made people police themselves rather than risk drawing unwanted attention. It was Cole reflected exactly the kind of system that would collapse quickly if enough people found the courage to stand up at the same time. The challenge was convincing them that such courage wouldn't be rewarded with unmarked graves. Maria's Cantina sat on the eastern edge of town, far enough from the main street to offer some privacy, but close enough to civilization to discourage the kind of open violence that might draw territorial attention. The building itself was adobe and timber, weathered but solid, with the kind of organic architecture that suggested it had grown from the landscape rather than being imposed upon it. Cole approached carefully, using the gathering dusk as cover, while he studied the building and its surroundings. 2 horses were tied to the hitching post. Outside, good animals well cared for, suggesting their owners were people of some substance. Light spilled from the windows, warm and welcoming, but Cole had learned not to trust appearances. The interior of the cantina was exactly what he'd expected, low-ceilinged and intimate, with heavy wooden tables and chairs that looked like they'd been handmade by someone who understood both craftsmanship and durability. The air carried scents of chili peppers, wood smoke, and the indefinable mixture of hope and desperation that seemed to permeate every gathering place on the frontier. Maria herself turned out to be a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of presence that suggested she'd seen everything the desert could throw at a person and emerged stronger for the experience. She looked up as Cole entered her dark eyes, assessing him with the practiced gaze of someone who'd learned to read dangerous men quickly and accurately. "Senor Banister," she said, her accented English warm but cautious. "We have been expecting you. Have you—" Cole removed his hat, a gesture of respect that seemed to earn him a slight softening in her expression. "And who might we be? People who knew Samuel Fletcher, people who believe in what he died trying to accomplish." Maria gestured toward a table in the back corner where 3 figures sat in conversation. "People who have been waiting for someone like you to give them hope." As Cole's eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, he could make out the individuals seated at the corner table. Caroline Fletcher sat with her back to the wall, positioned where she could see both the front door and the rear exit. Beside her sat Diego Morales, the stable keeper who'd spoken to Cole that morning. The third figure was a surprise, a well-dressed man in his 40s with the kind of bearing that suggested education and authority. Cole made his way across the cantina, noting the way other patrons seemed to avoid looking directly at the corner table while remaining acutely aware of who was seated there. The dynamics of fear and resistance in a place like Redemption Creek were subtle but unmistakable once you learned to read them. "Mr. Banister," Caroline said as he approached, "thank you for coming." "Miss Fletcher," Cole nodded to Diego, then looked questioningly at the stranger. "Dr. Benjamin Harrison," the man said, rising to extend his hand. "No relation to the former president despite the name. I'm the territorial medical examiner here on what you might call unofficial business." Cole shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and steady gaze. "Official business would be investigating suspicious deaths, I imagine. What brings a man to unofficial business in a place like this?" "The same thing that brought you here, I suspect. Questions about Samuel Fletcher's death that the official investigation seemed remarkably uninterested in pursuing." Dr. Harrison gestured for Cole to take the remaining chair. "Questions about a pattern of accidents and coincidences that becomes rather suspicious when viewed as a whole." Cole settled into his chair, positioning himself where he could watch the room while participating in the conversation. "What kind of pattern?" Caroline leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. 23 deaths in the past 5 years, Mr. Banister. 23 people who opposed Harrington's expansion or possessed land he wanted to acquire, all ruled accidental or natural causes. 23. Cole felt something cold settle in his stomach. The same number as his own kill count, too specific to be coincidental. "The Martinez family," Diego said quietly. "Flash flood that struck only their farm, leaving neighboring properties untouched. The Brennan Ranch cattle poisoning that affected only the disputed grazing areas. Tom Wilson, the previous sheriff, who was asking too many questions about missing persons thrown from his horse during what witnesses described as a perfectly calm evening ride." Dr. Harrison opened a leather portfolio and withdrew a sheaf of papers. "I've been conducting my own investigation for the past year, reviewing coroner's reports, interviewing witnesses, documenting inconsistencies. What I've found is a systematic campaign of murder disguised as misfortune." Cole studied the documents Dr. Harrison placed on the table: medical reports, witness statements, property transfer records. Even in the dim light he could see they told a story of methodical elimination and calculated acquisition. Why hasn't this been reported to territorial authorities? "It has been," Caroline said bitterly. 3 times, in fact. Each time the reports somehow disappeared or were dismissed as the speculations of grieving relatives and disgruntled neighbors. It seems Harrington's influence extends well beyond the boundaries of this valley. "How far?" "Far enough," Dr. Harrison replied grimly. "Territorial legislature, land office, even certain individuals in the governor's office. Harrington has been very strategic about placing his people in positions of influence." Diego drained his glass of tequila and set it down with the deliberate care of a man trying to control his anger. "My nephew was one of the 23, he said quietly. "Miguel Morales, age 17. Found dead in the river, supposedly drowned while swimming. Except Miguel swam like a fish, and there were rope marks on his wrists that the official investigation chose to ignore." What had he done to attract Harrington's attention? Nothing except overhear a conversation he shouldn't have. Miguel worked part-time at the telegraph office, and he'd learned to read the patterns in the messages Harrington sent and received. Messages about shipments that didn't match any legitimate business, about meetings with people whose names never appeared in any public records. Cole felt pieces of the puzzle beginning to form a clearer picture. Harrington's not just stealing land, he's running some kind of smuggling operation. Guns mostly, Caroline confirmed. Weapons supposedly destined for military contracts that somehow end up in the hands of criminal organizations across the border. Also gold and silver from mines that officially don't exist. Artifacts stolen from Apache burial sites and anything else that can be moved quietly and sold for a substantial profit. The railroad spur that comes through the valley, Dr. Harrison added. Officially, it's used to transport legitimate ranch products to market. Unofficially, it's the perfect cover for moving contraband in both directions. Cole studied the faces around the table, intelligent, determined people who'd found themselves trapped in a situation that exceeded their ability to handle alone. What you're describing isn't just local corruption. It's a criminal enterprise with connections that reach into territorial and possibly federal government. Which is why we need someone with your particular skills and reputation, Caroline said. Someone who can't be intimidated or bought, someone who's faced worse odds and survived. You're asking me to go to war with a man who has unlimited resources and political protection. We're asking you to help us level the playing field, Diego corrected, to give people hope that resistance is possible. Maria appeared at their table carrying a bottle of tequila and an additional glass. She poured drinks for everyone, her movements efficient and practiced. There is something else you should know, Senor Banister, something about tomorrow's wedding that the others have not told you. Caroline and Diego exchanged glances, and Cole saw something pass between them that suggested uncomfortable secrets. What about the wedding, Father Morrison? Maria said simply. He is more than just a circuit preacher. He was Samuel Fletcher's contact with certain interested parties in the territorial government, people who would very much like to see Harrington's operation exposed and shut down. Dr. Harrison nodded slowly. Morrison has been gathering testimony, documenting evidence, building a case that could finally bring federal attention to what's happening here. Your wedding tomorrow, it's not just a ceremony, it's a meeting. A meeting for what? To transfer custody of the evidence my father collected, Caroline said quietly. The documents that disappeared the night he died, they didn't disappear. I have them hidden where Harrington will never find them. Tomorrow, during the wedding ceremony, I was planning to give them to Father Morrison for transport to federal authorities. Cole felt the weight of inevitability settling on his shoulders again. And Harrington knows about this plan. He suspects, which is why he's been moving so aggressively to eliminate potential threats. Caroline met his gaze directly. The wedding isn't just cover for your marriage to Aiyana, it's cover for the kind of evidence transfer that could destroy Harrington completely. Assuming we live long enough to complete it. That's where you come in, Diego said. We need someone who can protect the ceremony, ensure Morrison receives the documents, and deal with whatever force Harrington sends to stop us. Cole was quiet for a long moment, processing the full scope of what he was being asked to undertake. It was one thing to marry a mysterious Apache woman in order to gain protection and legitimacy in the valley. It was quite another to participate in a federal investigation that would inevitably result in violence on a scale that could consume everyone involved. Where are the documents now? He asked finally. Caroline hesitated, then seemed to reach some internal decision. Hidden in my father's coffin, buried with him in the cemetery behind the church. It seemed like the one place Harrington would never think to look, and the one place I could visit regularly without attracting suspicion. Clever and morbid. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Caroline's expression was steady, but Cole could see the cost of carrying such a burden for months. "I've been waiting for someone I could trust completely, someone who had the skills and courage to see this through to the end. And you think I'm that person? I think you're the only person we have left." Dr. Harrison leaned forward, his voice urgent. "Harrington's preparing for something big, Mr. Banister. Increased shipments, additional men arriving from outside the territory, meetings with people whose presence suggests major criminal activity. Whatever he's planning, it's going to happen soon." "How soon?" "Days, maybe weeks, which means this may be our last chance to stop him before he becomes too powerful to challenge." Cole thought about Aiyana, about her claims of visions and prophecies, about her certainty that he'd been sent by the spirits to play a specific role in the valley's fate. Whether or not he believed in such things, it was becoming clear that practical considerations were leading him toward the same conclusion. "Assuming I agree to help," he said slowly, "what's the plan? How do we retrieve the documents, get them to Morrison, and survive whatever Harrington throws at us?" Caroline and Diego exchanged another look, and Cole sensed they'd been planning this conversation for some time. "The wedding is scheduled for 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon," Caroline said. "Morrison will arrive in the morning and conduct a regular Sunday service first, which will give him legitimate cover for being there. During the service, I'll retrieve the documents from my father's grave, in front of witnesses. My father requested that fresh flowers be placed on his grave every Sunday. I've been honoring that request for months. It's become routine, expected. No one will think twice about seeing me at the cemetery during morning services." "What about security? Harrington's men will be watching everything." "Which is where Aiyana comes in," Diego said. "She knows the mountains around the church better than anyone. She can position herself to provide advance warning of any approaching threats." Dr. Harrison spread a hand-drawn map on the table. "The church sits in a natural bowl surrounded by high ground on 3 sides. Excellent for defense if you know what you're doing, but also easy to surround if your enemies have sufficient numbers." Cole studied the map, noting sightlines and escape routes, with the practiced eye of someone who'd survived more than his share of desperate situations. "How many men can we count on, besides ourselves?" "Maybe a dozen, possibly 15 if we include everyone who's willing to fight." Diego's expression was grim. "Not enough to win a pitched battle, but perhaps enough to create sufficient confusion for Morrison to escape with the evidence. And then after that, we either scatter to the winds and pray the federal investigation moves quickly enough to save us, or we make our final stand right here in the valley." Caroline's voice was steady, but Cole could hear the steel beneath it. "Either way, we'll have done what my father died trying to accomplish." Cole poured himself another glass of tequila and stared into its amber depths, seeing reflections of decisions made and unmade, of roads taken and abandoned. He'd come to Redemption Valley looking for peace, but peace seemed to be the one thing the desert couldn't offer him. "There's something you all need to understand," he said finally. "If I do this, if I help you tomorrow, there's no going back. Harrington will never stop hunting me, and anyone associated with me will become a target. Are you all prepared for that kind of commitment?" "Mr. Banister, Doctor," Harrison said quietly, "we became targets the moment we started asking questions about Samuel Fletcher's death. The only choice we have now is whether to face that reality actively or passively." "Besides," Maria added from behind the bar where she'd been listening to the conversation while polishing glasses, "some things are worth dying for. Freedom is one of them. Truth is another. The chance to leave our children a world where justice means something, that's a third." Cole looked around the table at the faces of people who'd already made their choice, who'd accepted the risks and consequences of standing up to power. He thought about Aiyana waiting somewhere in the darkness for his decision. He thought about the 23 ghosts that followed him and the 23 victims who deserved someone to speak for them. "All right," he said, "I'm in, but we do this my way, with military precision and proper planning. No heroic gestures, no unnecessary risks. We get Morrison the evidence and get out alive, or we don't do it at all." Caroline reached across the table and clasped his hand, her grip firm and warm. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me if we're all still breathing tomorrow night." Cole finished his tequila and stood. "I need to find Aiyana, brief her on the plan, and make sure she's positioned properly for tomorrow. Where can I find her?" "There's a place called Whispering Canyon, about 3 miles north of town," Diego said. "Follow the old mining road until you see a lightning-struck cottonwood, then head west into the rocks. She's been using the caves there as her base of operations." Cole nodded and headed for the door, then paused and looked back at the group still seated around the table. "One more thing. If this goes badly tomorrow, if Harrington's men overrun us, or Morrison doesn't make it out with the evidence, what then? Then we make them pay as high a price as possible," Caroline said simply. "And we trust that someone somewhere will continue the fight after we're gone." Cole touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement and stepped out into the desert night. The stars were brilliant overhead, cold and distant, as judgment casting just enough light to navigate by. Somewhere out there, Aiyana was waiting. Somewhere else, William Harrington was planning whatever move he intended to make tomorrow. And somewhere in between, a tired gunfighter who'd thought his war was over was preparing for what might be his final battle. The old mining road wound through a landscape of sage and stone, following the natural contours of the land, toward the mountains that rose like ancient monuments against the star-filled sky. Cole let justice pick her own pace, trusting the horse's instincts to navigate the uncertain footing in the darkness. The lightning-struck cottonwood Diego had mentioned was unmistakable. A massive tree split down the middle by some long-ago storm, its dead branches reaching toward the heavens like the arms of a penitent. Cole turned west as instructed, following a barely visible trail that led into a maze of red sandstone formations. The rocks seemed to glow faintly in the starlight, worn into fantastic shapes by centuries of wind and water. Cole found himself moving through a natural cathedral where towering spires and delicate arches created spaces that felt both ancient and eternal. It was the kind of landscape that made a man feel simultaneously insignificant and connected to something larger than himself. He'd been riding for perhaps 20 minutes when a voice spoke from the darkness ahead. "You're earlier than I expected." Aiyana materialized from the shadows like smoke given form, appearing on a boulder beside the trail, with the fluid grace that seemed to be her natural mode of movement. In the starlight, she looked more than ever like something from a dream, beautiful and mysterious and slightly dangerous. "Plans have changed," Cole said, reining in justice. "We need to talk." "I know, I've been watching the town since sunset. Harrington's men are moving, positioning themselves for something significant." Aiyana dropped lightly from the boulder and moved to stand beside his stirrup. "How much do you know about what's really happening tomorrow?" "More than I did this morning. The wedding is cover for something bigger, an evidence transfer that could bring down Harrington's entire operation." "And you've agreed to help?" Cole dismounted and faced her directly. In the uncertain light, her expression was unreadable, but he could sense tension in her posture. "I've agreed to try. Whether we succeed or not depends on a lot of factors beyond my control." He studied her face, trying to read the emotions there. "The question is, are you still willing to go through with the marriage, knowing what it really means? What do you think it means? We're open, violent, probably brief war against an enemy with superior numbers and resources." Cole's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "Even if we succeed tomorrow, even if Morrison gets the evidence to federal authorities, Harrington will never stop hunting us. We'll be marked for death for the rest of our lives, however long that might be." Aiyana was quiet for a moment, her dark eyes reflecting starlight like pools of still water. When she spoke, her voice carried the same certainty that had characterized their first meeting by the river. "Do you remember what I told you about dying first, in order to live, about being ghosts, looking for a way back to the living?" She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the sage smoke that seemed to cling to her hair and clothes. Tomorrow we choose between remaining dead or risking everything for the chance to truly live. Even if living means dying. Especially then, death without purpose is just ending. Death with purpose, that's transformation. Aiyana reached out and touched his face, her fingers cool against his skin. I've been dead for 3 months, Cole, hiding in caves, living on scraps, existing without hope or connection to anything meaningful. If tomorrow kills us both, at least we'll die having chosen to stand for something. Cole felt something shift inside him, a loosening of knots he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten they were there. For 3 years he'd been running from the weight of his actions, trying to escape the consequences of choices made in violence and desperation. But perhaps Aiyana was right. Perhaps the only way forward was through acceptance rather than avoidance. There's something else, he said. The evidence Caroline's been hiding, it's not just about Harrington's local crimes. It's documentation of a criminal network that extends across the territory and possibly beyond. If we succeed tomorrow, we won't just be bringing down one man. We'll be exposing a system of corruption that reaches into the highest levels of government. Good. Systems like that deserve to be exposed. They also have the resources to hunt us across multiple territories, to place bounties on our heads that would make us targets for every gun-hungry bounty hunter west of the Mississippi. Cole wanted her to understand the full scope of what they were contemplating. This isn't just about justice for Samuel Fletcher or freedom for Redemption Valley. This is about taking on forces that could destroy us both without even noticing the effort. Aiyana smiled, and in that expression Cole saw something that might have been joy, wild, fierce, and completely unafraid. Then we'd better make sure they notice, she said. They made their way deeper into the canyon, following a path that Aiyana seemed to know by memory despite the darkness. The rocks closed in around them, creating a sense of intimate shelter that made conversation feel both private and sacred. Tell me about the ceremony, Cole said. What exactly happens during an Apache wedding? There is no single Apache ceremony. Each band, each family has their own traditions, but the essential elements are consistent across tribes. Aiyana's voice took on the cadence of someone reciting something deeply meaningful. Exchange of gifts, binding of hands, sharing of food, and most importantly, the taking of vows before witnesses and the spirits. What kind of vows? Promises to stand together against whatever comes, to share strength in times of weakness, to honor each other's courage and accept each other's fears. She paused. To die together if necessary, but to live together if possible. Cole thought about marriage, about the conventional ceremonies he'd witnessed in his travels, with their emphasis on romance and domesticity, and the comfortable assumptions of peaceful prosperity. What Aiyana was describing sounded more like a military alliance blessed by ancient powers. And you believe the spirits will accept vows made under such circumstances, when we're essentially using marriage as a strategic alliance? I believe the spirits care more about intention than circumstance. We're not marrying for money or convenience or social advantage. We're marrying because two people who've lost everything have decided to risk what's left on the possibility of finding something worth keeping. They emerged into a small circular space surrounded by towering canyon walls, where a spring bubbled up from underground sources to create a pool of clear water. The acoustics of the space were perfect. Every sound seemed to resonate and amplify, creating an almost supernatural atmosphere. This is where we'll take our real vows, Aiyana said. Tonight before the ceremony tomorrow, the public wedding will be for show for legal necessity and strategic cover, but the true marriage that happens here between us and the spirits that guard this place. Cole looked around the hidden canyon, feeling the weight of centuries in the stone walls and the patient murmur of water that had been flowing here since before human memory. It felt like the kind of place where important things happened, where decisions made would echo across time. What do we need to do? Aiyana moved to the water's edge and began gathering stones from the pool, selecting each one with careful deliberation. First, we make an offering to the 4 directions, asking for their blessing and protection. Then we exchange tokens of commitment, something personal, something that carries meaning beyond its material value. She arranged the stones in a careful pattern around the pool's edge, then produced a small leather pouch from which she withdrew what looked like herbs and sacred objects. The ritual preparations were complex but felt natural, as if the canyon itself was guiding their movements. "I don't have anything to give you," Cole realized. "Nothing that would be appropriate for such a ceremony." "Yes, you do." Aiyana looked at him directly. "Give me one of your bullets, the one you've been saving for yourself, the one you carry as insurance against capture or torture or the kind of death that no man should have to face." Cole felt his blood chill. She was right, he'd carried such a bullet for years. A single .45 cartridge kept separate from the others, marked with a small notch that distinguished it from ordinary ammunition. It was the kind of precaution that professional gunfighters learn to take insurance against the worst possible outcomes. "How did you know about that?" "Because I know you. Because I've seen the careful way you check your weapons, the way you count your ammunition, the way you prepare for every possibility, including your own death." Aiyana's voice was gentle but implacable. "That bullet represents your willingness to choose death over dishonor. Give it to me, and I'll give you something that represents the possibility of choosing life over fear." Cole reached into his ammunition pouch and withdrew the marked bullet, feeling its familiar weight in his palm. For 3 years, it had been his final guarantee of control, his assurance that no matter how badly things went, he would face his end on his own terms. Handing it to Aiyana felt like giving away a piece of his soul. "And what will you give me in return?" Aiyana reached beneath her shirt and withdrew a small object on a leather cord, a piece of turquoise carved into the shape of a bird in flight. Even in the starlight, Cole could see it was beautiful work, the kind of craftsmanship that spoke to both skill and deep personal meaning. "This belonged to my grandmother, who received it from her grandmother before her. It's meant to carry the spirit of the wearer safely between the world of the living and the world of the dead." Aiyana held it out to him. "It's protected my family for 4 generations. Now I give it to you to protect the family we're choosing to become." Cole took the pendant, feeling its smooth warmth against his palm. The carving was exquisite, capturing not just the form of a bird, but the essence of flight itself. Freedom, grace, the ability to transcend earthly limitations. "I can't take this. It's too valuable, too important to your heritage." "It's exactly because it's important that I'm giving it to you." The spirits don't value cheap gifts or convenient gestures. They respond to sacrifice, to offerings that cost us something meaningful. Aiyana closed his fingers around the pendant. "Besides, heritage isn't about keeping things. It's about passing them on to people who will honor their meaning." They completed the ceremony as the stars wheeled overhead, speaking vows that had nothing to do with conventional marriage and everything to do with choosing to stand together against whatever forces sought to destroy them. When it was finished, Cole felt something fundamental had changed, not just in his relationship with Aiyana, but in his understanding of himself and his place in the world. "Tomorrow," Aiyana said as they prepared to leave the canyon, "we face whatever comes as one unit instead of 2 individuals. That gives us strength neither of us possessed alone. And if tomorrow doesn't go the way we hope, then we die as we've chosen to live together, fighting for something that matters more than our individual survival." Aiyana mounted her horse, a paint mare that appeared from the shadows as if summoned by thought alone. "But I don't think that's how this story ends, Cole Banister. I think it ends with something none of us expected." "What makes you so certain?" "Because the spirits that brought us together aren't finished with us yet. And because sometimes when people are desperate enough and brave enough and angry enough, they can accomplish things that seemed impossible." They rode back toward town together, moving through the starlit landscape like shadows with purpose. Tomorrow would bring the culmination of everything they'd set in motion. Marriage evidence transfer and almost certainly violence on a scale that would determine the fate of everyone in Redemption Valley. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Cole Banister rode toward an uncertain future with something that might actually be hope. The morning sun rose blood red over Redemption Valley, painting the desert in shades that seemed prophetic of what was to come. Cole stood at the window of the small room he'd rented above the saloon, watching the town slowly come to life, while his mind ran through every detail of the plan they'd constructed the night before. In a few hours, he would be married to a woman who claimed to speak with spirits, participating in a deception that could either free the valley from tyranny or get them all killed in the attempt. The turquoise pendant Aiyana had given him hung warm against his chest, a tangible reminder of vows taken under starlight and promises made to forces he didn't entirely understand. His fingers found the unfamiliar weight of it, through his shirt tracing the carved lines of the bird in flight. For a man who'd spent years trusting nothing but his own skill and the reliability of his weapons, accepting such a talisman felt like a leap of faith he wasn't sure he was ready to make. A soft knock at his door interrupted his contemplation. Cole's hand moved instinctively to his gun before he recognized the pattern. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. The signal Diego had taught him the night before. "It's open," Cole called softly. Caroline Fletcher slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind her. She wore a simple blue dress that somehow managed to make her look both beautiful and practical, and she carried a small bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. Her green eyes were bright with nervous energy, but her hands were steady. "Good morning, husband-to-be," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Are you ready for your wedding day? As ready as a man can be for something he doesn't entirely understand." Cole gestured toward the room's single chair. "Please sit. You look like you could use a moment to rest." Caroline accepted the chair gratefully, setting her bundle on the small table beside it. "I've been up since before dawn making final preparations. The documents are ready for transfer. Father Morrison arrived on schedule, and our volunteers are positioning themselves as we discussed." "What about Harrington's response? Any signs of unusual activity?" "More than usual activity, I'm afraid. Dr. Harrison counted at least 20 additional men who arrived in town overnight. Professional gunmen by the look of them. Harrington's not taking any chances with today's proceedings." Cole felt the familiar coldness settling over him, the mental state that had carried him through countless dangerous situations. 20 men against their dozen volunteers would be poor odds under the best circumstances, and these circumstances were far from optimal. Where are they positioned? Scattered throughout town, trying to look casual, but clearly watching all approaches to the church. 2 men are stationed at the livery stable, cutting off our most obvious escape route. 4 more are at the general store, which gives them a clear view of the main street. Caroline's voice was steady, but Cole could hear the tension beneath it. They're being careful not to seem threatening before the ceremony begins, but once Morrison starts the service, all pretense goes out the window, Cole finished. They'll move to surround the church and wait for their moment. Caroline nodded grimly. Ducker. Harrison thinks they'll wait until after the evidence transfer is complete, then move to eliminate everyone who knows about it. Clean sweep, no witnesses, and they can claim we were all killed during some kind of Apache raid. Convenient. Cole checked his weapons with the automatic precision of long habit, Colt 45, at his hip, backup Derringer, and his boot knife sheathed at his back. What about Aiyana? Is she in position? She's been in the rocks above the church since before dawn, watching for any sign of movement from the mountains. So far, everything seems quiet on that front. Caroline hesitated, then continued. There's something else, though, something I learned this morning that changes our situation. What kind of change? Caroline unwrapped her bundle, revealing not just papers, but what looked like a small strongbox made of polished steel. This morning, while retrieving my father's documents from his grave, I found something else. something he'd hidden separately wrapped in oiled leather and buried deeper than the main cache. She opened the strongbox with a small key she wore on a chain around her neck. Inside, nestled in velvet padding, was a collection of items that made Cole's blood run cold. Official correspondence bearing territorial seals, bank drafts signed by prominent political figures, and what appeared to be photographs of meetings between Harrington and men Cole recognized from wanted posters. "Jesus," he breathed. "Your father wasn't just documenting local crimes. He was building a case against a conspiracy that reaches all the way to Santa Fe and beyond. Look at this." Caroline withdrew a letter bearing the seal of the territorial governor's office. Even upside down, Cole could see it was signed by someone with considerable authority. Father Morrison isn't just a circuit preacher. He's a federal marshal working undercover investigating corruption in the territorial government. The implications hit Cole like a physical blow. If Morrison was federal law enforcement, then today's ceremony wasn't just about transferring evidence. It was about completing a federal investigation that had been years in the making. And if Harrington suspected Morrison's true identity, "We need to call this off," Cole said immediately. "If Harrington knows what Morrison really is, then today isn't a trap for us, it's a trap for him. 20 gunmen, remote location, no backup for miles. They could kill a federal marshal and blame it on Apache raiders or local violence. We can't call it off. Morrison won't leave without the evidence, and this may be our only chance to get it to him safely." Caroline's jaw was set with determination that reminded Cole of her father's photograph. "Besides, there's something else you need to know. Something about why Morrison specifically requested this assignment." She withdrew another document from the strongbox, a military service record that made Cole's hands shake as he read it. Lieutenant James Harrington, 3rd Pennsylvania Volunteers, killed in action at Gettysburg, July 2nd, 1863, shot by Union sniper at extreme range while attempting to rally Confederate prisoners during a prisoner exchange. Morrison was James Harrington's commanding officer, Caroline said quietly. He's been tracking his father's criminal activities for 3 years, ever since learning that William Harrington blamed Union forces for his son's death and swore revenge against everyone involved, including me, especially you. Morrison believes Harrington has been using his criminal network to hunt down Union veterans, specifically members of Berdan's sharpshooters. 7 men have died under suspicious circumstances over the past 3 years, all former snipers, all killed in ways that looked like accidents or local violence. Cole sank onto the bed, his mind reeling with the implications. He'd thought he was escaping his past by coming to Redemption Valley, but instead he'd walked directly into the center of a web that had been spun specifically to catch him. "How long has Morrison known I was here?" "Since the day you bought the Fletcher place. He's been monitoring Harrington's communications, waiting for him to make his move." Caroline's voice was gentle but implacable. "You were never here by accident, Cole. This whole situation, the property sale, the timing, even your meeting with Aiyana, it was all orchestrated to bring you to this place at this time." "By who? Morrison, the federal government. By Aiyana." Caroline's words fell into the room like stones into still water. "She's not just some Apache woman who escaped from Harrington's custody. She's a federal informant recruited by Morrison to help gather intelligence on Harrington's operations. Everything she told you about visions and spirits, it was cover for a very sophisticated intelligence operation." Cole felt the world tilt sideways. The woman he'd married in a sacred ceremony under the stars, the woman he'd trusted with his life and his future, had been playing a role from the very beginning. The pendant around his neck suddenly felt like a chain binding him to obligations he'd never agreed to accept. "How long have you known?" "Since yesterday morning when Morrison arrived and briefed me on the full scope of the operation. He needed someone Aiyana could trust, someone who could help her maintain her cover while gathering the final pieces of evidence needed to close the case." and someone expendable enough that it wouldn't matter if he got killed in the process. Caroline flinched at the bitterness in his tone. That's not how Morrison sees it. He believes you're the key to bringing Harrington's network down permanently. Your presence here forces Harrington to act openly to reveal the full extent of his resources and connections. By using me as bait. By giving you the chance to choose what kind of man you want to be. Morrison knows your history, Cole. He knows about the 23 men you've killed, the guilt you carry, the way you've been running from your own reputation. Caroline leaned forward, her green eyes intense. He also knows you're the only man in the territory with the skills and experience to protect today's operation from the kind of force Harrington is preparing to deploy. Cole stood and moved to the window again, staring out at the town where armed men waited for the signal to begin killing. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 3 years trying to escape the violence that had defined his life, only to discover that violence had been waiting patiently for his return. What happens if I refuse, if I just saddle up and ride out of here right now? Then Morrison dies along with everyone else who's been working to expose Harrington's crimes. The evidence gets destroyed, the investigation collapses, and the people of this valley continue to live under the thumb of a man who murders anyone who opposes him. Caroline's voice was quiet but carrying absolute certainty, and you go back to running carrying not just 23 ghosts, but the knowledge that you had a chance to prevent more killing and chose not to take it. Cole thought about the pendant around his neck, about vows taken under starlight, about a woman who might have lied about her identity, but had somehow spoken truth about the choices that defined a man's character. Whether Aiyana was an Apache mystic or a federal informant, she'd been right about one thing: some decisions determine not just how you lived, but who you were. All right, he said finally, I'm in. But we do this properly with full disclosure and clear objectives. No more lies, no more hidden agendas. What exactly is Morrison expecting from me? Caroline consulted a piece of paper she withdrew from the strongbox. Protection of the evidence transfer, coordination of local resistance during the expected attack, and if possible, capture of William Harrington alive for federal prosecution. Capture, not killing. Morrison believes Harrington has information about criminal networks in other territories. His testimony could expose corruption across the entire Southwest. Caroline folded the paper carefully. But Morrison also understands that in a situation like today's, survival takes precedence over legal niceties. Cole nodded grimly. What about afterwards? Assuming we survive today, what happens to the people who've helped us? Harrington's organization extends beyond this valley. They'll face retaliation. Federal protection for key witnesses, relocation assistance for families who want to leave, and a permanent federal presence in the valley to prevent future criminal activity. Caroline's expression softened slightly. Morrison may be using us, but he's not abandoning us. He understands the price people have paid to make this operation possible. And what about Aiyana? What happens to her when this is over? I don't know. Morrison's been deliberately vague about her future role in federal operations. Caroline hesitated. I get the impression that her cooperation was obtained through methods that weren't entirely voluntary. Cole felt cold anger settling in his chest. If Aiyana had been coerced into playing this role, if her participation in the investigation hadn't been freely chosen, then the federal government was as guilty of manipulation as Harrington was of murder. We need to get to the church, Caroline said, consulting a pocket watch. The morning service starts in 30 minutes, and I need to be seen arriving early to maintain my cover. Cole gathered his gear, methodically, extra ammunition, emergency supplies, the few personal items he couldn't afford to lose. The routine of preparation helped calm his mind, focusing his attention on immediate tactical concerns rather than the larger questions of trust and betrayal that threatened to overwhelm him. One more thing, Caroline said as they prepared to leave. Morrison asked me to give you this. She handed him a badge, a federal marshal's star that caught the morning light like captured fire. Cole stared at it for a long moment, understanding what it represented and what it would cost him to accept it. He's offering me a position. He's offering you a chance to make the violence in your past serve something larger than personal survival. The territory needs marshals who understand how to deal with organized criminal activity. Caroline's voice carried a note of hope. It would mean stability, legitimate authority, the chance to build something instead of just destroying. Cole pinned the badge inside his jacket, where it wouldn't be visible but would be protected from damage. Whether he kept it or not would depend on what happened in the next few hours, but accepting it felt like crossing a threshold he couldn't uncross. They left the saloon together, moving through streets that seemed too quiet for a normal Sunday morning. Cole noted the positions of Harrington's men with professional detachment, good placement, professional discipline, clear fields of fire. Whoever was commanding them understood small unit tactics and wasn't taking anything for granted. The church sat in its natural bowl like a jewel in the desert, its adobe walls glowing warm and welcoming in the morning sun. But Cole could see the tactical nightmare it represented: high ground, on three sides, limited escape routes, perfect for a siege situation. If Harrington's men managed to surround the building, everyone inside would be trapped. Father Morrison was already at the church, greeting early arrivals with the practiced warmth of a man accustomed to frontier communities. He was younger than Cole had expected, maybe 40, with the kind of build that suggested he was comfortable with both Bible and gun. His eyes met Cole's for just a moment, long enough to convey recognition and approval. "Mr. Banister," Morrison said, extending his hand, "Caroline has told me so much about you. I understand congratulations are in order." "Thank you, Father, though I suspect today will be memorable for reasons beyond the ceremony." Morrison's smile didn't waver, but Cole saw something flicker in his eyes. Acknowledgement of shared understanding, recognition of a man prepared for violence. "All ceremonies are transformative, my son. The question is what kind of transformation we choose to embrace." Cole took a seat near the back of the church, positioning himself where he could watch both the congregation and the approaches to the building. The morning service proceeded with deliberate normalcy, hymns, sung by voices that tried to hide their nervousness, prayers offered for peace that everyone knew was about to be shattered, readings from scripture that seemed to carry double meanings in the charged atmosphere. It was during the reading from Ecclesiastes, "To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven," that Cole saw the first sign of movement on the ridge above the church. A flash of reflected sunlight from what might have been a telescope or rifle scope, gone almost before he registered it. Aiyana's signal. Harrington's men were moving into final position. Cole caught Morrison's eye and nodded slightly. The federal marshal concluded the regular service with practiced efficiency, dismissing the congregation with blessings that carried undertones of farewell. Most of the worshippers left immediately, understanding without being told that they didn't want to be present for whatever was coming next. But a dozen men and women remained behind: Diego Morales, Dr. Harrison Maria from the cantina, and others who'd committed themselves to this moment, despite knowing its probable cost. They arranged themselves around the small sanctuary like soldiers taking defensive positions, though their weapons remained concealed. Caroline rose during the brief intermission between services and walked calmly to the cemetery behind the church. Cole watched through a window as she knelt beside her father's grave, placing fresh flowers while simultaneously retrieving the oiled packet that contained evidence worth killing for. Her movements were natural, unhurried, giving no sign of the importance of what she was doing. She returned to the church carrying the packet in a flower basket, the kind of detail that would seem innocent to any observer. Morrison received it during what appeared to be a casual conversation about memorial arrangements, sliding the evidence into his traveling bag with practiced discretion. "And now," Morrison announced to the remaining congregation, "we gather to witness the union of Cole Banister and Aiyana in the bonds of holy matrimony." Aiyana entered through the church's side door like a vision from another world. She wore traditional Apache wedding dress, white buckskin, decorated with turquoise and silver, her long black hair braided with feathers and beads. The transformation from the practical woman Cole had known to this figure of almost supernatural beauty was so complete that for a moment he forgot everything else. She moved to stand beside him with the fluid grace that seemed to be her natural mode of movement, but Cole could see tension in her posture, awareness of the armed men positioning themselves around the building. Her dark eyes met his for just a moment, and in them he saw something that might have been an apology. "Dearly beloved," Morrison began, his voice carrying clearly through the small sanctuary, "we are gathered here in the sight of God and these witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words of the ceremony proceeded with surreal normalcy, while Cole's tactical awareness tracked the sounds of movement outside the church. Horses approaching from multiple directions, the soft scrape of boots on stone, the metallic click of weapons being readied. Harrington's men were completing their encirclement. "Cole," Morrison continued, "do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Cole replied, the words carrying weight beyond their ceremonial meaning. Whatever deceptions had brought them to this moment, whatever truths remained hidden between them, he was choosing to stand with Aiyana against whatever forces sought to destroy them. "Aiyana, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," she replied, her voice steady despite the danger gathering around them like storm clouds. Morrison reached into his traveling bag as if retrieving a Bible, but Cole saw him palm something else, a small pistol that disappeared into his sleeve with practiced sleight of hand. The federal marshal was preparing for the probability that this ceremony would end in violence. "By the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, and the grace of Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Morrison's voice carried a note of finality that seemed to encompass more than just the marriage ceremony. "You may kiss the bride." Cole took Aiyana's hands in his, feeling the calluses that spoke to hard work and harder choices. When their lips met, he tasted salt and sage, determination and fear, the complex mixture of emotions that defined people caught between competing loyalties and impossible decisions. The kiss was interrupted by the sound of Frank Garrett's voice, amplified by a speaking trumpet from somewhere outside the church. "Attention inside the church. This building is surrounded by legally deputized peace officers acting under territorial authority. Exit the building immediately with your hands visible, and no one will be harmed." Morrison stepped away from the altar, his transformation from minister to federal marshal almost instantaneous. The gentle authority of a man of God was replaced by the cold competence of someone trained to enforce federal law through violence if necessary. "Lies," Morrison called back, his voice carrying clearly through the church's open windows. "I am United States Marshal Samuel Morrison, acting under federal authority in the investigation of organized criminal activity. You are interfering with a federal operation." Garrett's laughter echoed off the canyon walls. "Federal Marshal. That's a good one, preacher. But even if it were true, this is territorial jurisdiction. Your authority doesn't extend to local law enforcement matters. Murder and conspiracy across state lines are federal crimes," Morrison replied. "Stand down immediately or face the consequences of assaulting a federal officer." The response came in the form of a rifle shot that shattered one of the church's windows, sending glass cascading across the wooden pews. Cole pulled Aiyana down behind the altar as more shots followed, the sound of gunfire echoing through the canyon like thunder. "So much for negotiation," Dr. Harrison observed grimly, drawing a pistol from beneath his medical bag. Cole rose slightly, using the altar for cover while he assessed their tactical situation. The church's thick adobe walls would provide good protection against small arms fire, but the windows were obvious weak points. Worse, he could see muzzle flashes from at least 3 different positions on the surrounding ridges, meaning Harrington's men had achieved the high ground advantage. "How many rounds do we have?" he called to the others. "Maybe 200 between all of us," Diego replied from his position near the north wall. "Enough for a fight, but not enough for a siege." "Then we don't fight a siege. We break out before they can consolidate their positions." Cole checked his weapons one final time. "Morrison, is there a back way out of this canyon?" "Trail through the rocks behind the cemetery, but it's narrow and exposed. They'll have it covered." "Not if we give them something else to think about." Cole looked around the sanctuary, noting the positions of their allies, the fields of fire available through the windows, the tactical possibilities offered by the church's architecture. "Caroline, where would Harrington position himself during an operation like this? High ground eastern ridge where he can observe everything without exposing himself to return fire." Caroline had produced a rifle from somewhere and was checking its loads with practiced efficiency. "He likes to watch his enemies die." "Good. That gives us a target." Cole turned to Aiyana, noting the way she'd positioned herself to cover one of the side windows. "How well do you know the rocks above the church?" "Well enough to move through them without being seen, if that's what you're asking." "It is. I need you to work your way around to Harrington's position, get close enough to either capture him or create enough confusion to cover our escape." Aiyana met his gaze directly. "And if I can't take him alive, then you do whatever's necessary to protect the people in this church." Cole's voice was flat professional. "No half measures, no hesitation. Too many people have died because of that man's ambitions." She nodded once, then moved toward the back of the church, with the fluid silence that seemed to be her natural gift. Cole watched her disappear into the shadows near the altar, heading for whatever route she'd planned to use for exactly this kind of situation. Another volley of gunfire raked the church this time, accompanied by the sound of breaking wood as bullets found gaps in the adobe walls. One of their volunteers, a young rancher named Tom Bradley, cried out as a splinter caught him across the cheek, but the wound was minor and his position remained secure. "Morrison," Cole called, "how long before federal backup arrives?" "What backup?" The marshal's laugh was bitter. "This is an undercover operation. Remember, no one knows I'm here except my immediate supervisor, and he's 300 miles away in Santa Fe." Cole absorbed this information with the kind of fatalistic calm that had carried him through impossible situations before. No backup, limited ammunition, surrounded by superior numbers, in a tactically disadvantageous position. It was, he reflected, exactly the kind of situation that had defined most of his adult life. "All right then," he said, rising from cover long enough to send 3 carefully aimed shots toward a muzzle flash on the north ridge. "We do this the hard way." The battle for the church began in earnest. As Cole's shot found its mark, the sharp cry of a wounded man echoing across the canyon. Harrington's men responded with concentrated fire that turned the air inside the sanctuary thick with adobe dust and splinters of wood. But Cole's people were fighting for more than just their lives. They were fighting for the chance to see justice done, to break the cycle of fear and violence that had dominated the valley for too long. And sometimes when people found something worth dying for, they discovered they were capable of things that had seemed impossible. The real war for Redemption Valley had finally begun. The gunfight that erupted around the small adobe church would be remembered in Redemption Valley for generations, not just for its violence, but for the way it marked the moment when ordinary people chose to stand against tyranny rather than submit to it. Cole moved through the sanctuary like a man born to warfare, directing defensive fire with the calm precision of someone who'd learned that panic was just another way of dying badly. "Diego, keep that north window covered," he called, sending 2 quick shots toward a rifle barrel that had appeared between the rocks above. Dr. Harrison, watch the front entrance. They'll try to rush us once they realize we're not breaking under pressure. The sound of gunfire echoed off the canyon walls like rolling thunder, punctuated by the sharp crack of splintering wood and the duller thud of bullets embedding themselves in adobe. Caroline Fletcher moved between positions with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd grown up understanding that survival often depended on shooting straight under pressure, her rifle barking methodically as she picked targets among the rocks. Cole caught a glimpse of movement on the eastern ridge, a flash of blue fabric that might have been Aiyana working her way toward Harrington's position. The sight sent a cold spike of fear through his chest, not for his own safety, but for hers. Whatever her real identity, whatever deceptions had brought them together, the thought of losing her to Harrington's bullets was more than he could bear. "Marshal Morrison," Frank Garrett's voice boomed across the canyon, amplified by his speaking trumpet. "You're harboring fugitives from territorial justice. Surrender them peacefully and we'll allow you to leave unharmed." Morrison laughed grimly, working the lever action of his rifle with practiced efficiency. "Garrett, you're about as subtle as a thunderstorm. Tell Harrington that his charade is over. We have enough evidence to hang him and half his organization." The response came in the form of concentrated fire from at least 6 different positions, turning the air inside the church thick with dust and the acrid smell of gunpowder. One bullet punched through the wooden cross above the altar, sending splinters cascading down on Cole and Morrison like wooden rain. "They're trying to pin us down while they maneuver for a better position," Cole observed, noting the pattern of the gunfire. "Professional tactics, military coordination. Whoever's commanding them knows what he's doing." "That would be Captain Marcus Webb," Morrison replied, sending a shot toward a muzzle flash on the south ridge. Former Confederate cavalry officer, worked as a mercenary in Mexico before Harrington recruited him. He's good at his job. How good? Good enough that 3 federal marshals have died trying to arrest him over the past 2 years. Morrison's voice carried the bitter edge of personal knowledge. He's also smart enough to know that we can't hold this position indefinitely. Cole studied the tactical situation with the cold assessment that had kept him alive through a dozen impossible fights. The church's adobe walls provided excellent protection against rifle fire, but the building's windows and doors were obvious weak points that Webb's men were already exploiting. Worse, their ammunition was limited while their enemies could afford to maintain sustained fire for hours. "We need to break their concentration," Cole said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Give them something else to worry about." He moved to the back window and peered carefully through a gap in the curtains. The cemetery behind the church stretched toward a narrow trail that led up into the rocks, their only escape route, but one that would require crossing 50 yards of open ground under direct fire from the ridges above. "Tom Bradley," Cole called to the young rancher who'd taken a position near the south wall. "How well do you know that trail behind the cemetery?" "Well enough. Used to hunt bighorn sheep in those rocks when I was a boy." Bradley's voice was steady despite the blood trickling from his bullet-creased cheek. "Why?" "Because in about 10 minutes, you're going to lead our wounded and non-combatants up that trail while the rest of us provide covering fire." Cole checked his ammunition, 15 rounds left in his belt, plus the Derringer and whatever loose cartridges he could scavenge from the others. "Think you can manage that?" "I can manage it. Question is whether you can keep Webb's men busy enough to give us a clear run." Cole smiled grimly. "Leave that to me." The plan he was forming was desperate, probably suicidal, and exactly the kind of gesture that would either turn the tide of battle or get them all killed in spectacular fashion. But sometimes desperate situations called for desperate measures, and Cole Banister had never been a man to do things halfway. "Morrison," he said, moving back to the federal marshal's position, "that evidence Caroline gave you, is it secure?" "Secured and documented. Even if something happens to me, copies have been sent to my supervisor in Santa Fe." Morrison's eyes were hard with determination. Harrington's going down one way or another. Good, because I'm about to do something that might not leave any of us alive to testify." Before Morrison could ask what he meant, Cole was moving toward the front door of the church. Caroline caught his arm as he passed her position. "Where are you going?" "To even the odds." Cole's voice carried the flat certainty of a man who'd made his peace with probability. "Keep them covered until I get back." "And if you don't get back—" Cole looked into her green eyes, seeing fear and determination, and something else that might have been affection. "Then make sure they remember what we died for." He slipped out the church's side door into the morning sunlight, immediately rolling behind a low stone wall that provided minimal cover from the rifles above. The cemetery stretched before him like a garden of the dead, its weathered headstones and wooden crosses offering precious little concealment for a man trying to cross open ground. But Cole had learned long ago that sometimes the most dangerous course of action was also the most unexpected. Instead of trying to work his way carefully through the cemetery, he rose to his feet and began walking directly toward the largest group of headstones, his hands visible, but his gun loose in its holster. "Hold your fire." The voice came from the eastern ridge, Captain Webb recognizing that something unusual was happening. "Let's see what the famous preacher's ghost thinks he's doing." Cole continued walking, his pace steady and unhurried. Despite the rifle barrels, he could see tracking his movement from multiple positions. The largest headstone in the cemetery belonged to Jeremiah Fletcher Caroline's grandfather, a massive granite monument that would provide excellent cover for what he had in mind. "That's far enough, Banister." Webb's voice carried clearly across the canyon. "State your business, or prepare to die where you stand." Cole stopped beside the Fletcher monument, his right hand resting casually near his gun. "My business is with William Harrington. Tell him Cole Banister wants to discuss the matter of his son's death." A long silence stretched across the canyon, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling high above the mountains. Then Harrington's voice answered from the eastern ridge, carrying a weight of hatred that made the desert air seem to shimmer with heat. "You have exactly 1 minute to explain why I shouldn't order my men to cut you down where you stand. Because you've been waiting 3 years for this conversation, and you'll regret it for the rest of your life if you end it with a bullet instead of the truth." Cole's voice carried clearly in the thin air. "I killed your boy at Gettysburg. You want to know why." Another silence, longer this time. Cole could imagine the struggle taking place on the ridge above Harrington's desire for immediate revenge, warring with his need to understand the circumstances of his son's death. "You have 5 minutes, Harrington finally called. "Say what you came to say." Cole drew his Colt with deliberate slowness, holding it by the barrel so that everyone could see he wasn't preparing to shoot. Then he placed it carefully on top of the granite headstone and stepped back, his hands visible and empty. July 2nd, 1863. He called, his voice carrying across the canyon like a prayer or a confession. "Your boy was trying to stop a massacre." The words seemed to echo off the canyon walls, creating a silence that felt deeper than the absence of sound. Cole could see movement on the ridges as Harrington's men strained to hear what would come next. "There was a group of Confederate prisoners," Cole continued. "Maybe 30 men who'd surrendered after Pickett's charge failed. They were being held under guard while waiting for transport to a prisoner of war camp. But some of the Union soldiers guarding them had lost friends in the charge, and they were talking about taking revenge." Cole paused, remembering that terrible day with perfect clarity, the heat, the smell of gunpowder and blood, the way young James Harrington had looked when he'd stepped between armed men and defenseless prisoners. "Your son heard the talk and knew what was coming. He could have walked away, could have let someone else deal with the situation. Instead, he rode into the middle of a group of angry Union soldiers and told them that murdering prisoners was against everything the Union stood for." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Cole could feel the weight of invisible rifle barrels trained on him, But he also sensed something else, a shift in the attention of the men listening, a recognition that this wasn't the conversation they'd expected. The soldiers told him to mind his own business. Your boy drew his saber and told them that protecting prisoners was exactly his business, that he'd fight any man who tried to harm defenseless enemies. Cole's voice grew quiet, forcing everyone to strain to hear. That's when I shot him. You murdered my son to protect Confederate prisoners. Harrington's voice cracked with disbelief and rage. I shot him to save his life. The words hit the canyon like physical blows. There were 12 Union soldiers ready to kill him for defending Confederate prisoners. I was positioned 400 yards away with a clear shot, and I had maybe 10 seconds to make a decision. Cole could see them. Harrington now, a tall figure silhouetted against the sky on the eastern ridge, his body rigid with tension and confusion. I aimed for his shoulder, tried to put him down without killing him, figured a wounded officer would get medical attention and survive the war, but shooting at that distance with that kind of pressure... Cole's voice broke slightly. The bullet went 6 inches high and 3 inches left, killed him instantly. The truth hung in the desert air, like smoke from a distant fire. Cole could see the effect of his words rippling through the men positioned around the canyon, confusion, doubt, the kind of moral uncertainty that made violence harder to sustain. You're lying, Harrington called, but his voice lacked conviction. You're trying to confuse my men, make them doubt their orders. I'm telling you the truth about your son's death because you deserve to know it. James Harrington died trying to do the right thing, trying to protect men who couldn't protect themselves. I killed him by accident while trying to save his life. Cole stepped closer to the headstone, his voice rising to carry clearly across the canyon. Your boy was a hero, Harrington, and you've spent 3 years dishonoring his memory by becoming the kind of man he died trying to stop. The effect of these words was immediate and dramatic. Cole could see movement on the ridges as some of Harrington's men began to shift position, no longer certain they were fighting for the right cause. More importantly, he could see Harrington himself struggling with the implications of what he'd just heard. Even if that's true, Harrington finally called, it doesn't change what you've done here. You've interfered with legitimate business operations, harbored fugitives from justice, participated in criminal conspiracy. I've helped expose a criminal organization that's murdered 23 innocent people and corrupted territorial government at the highest levels, Cole replied. The only fugitives here are you and your men. That was when Aiyana struck. Cole had been watching for her movement on the eastern ridge, but even he was surprised by the speed and precision of her attack. She materialized behind Harrington like a shadow given form, her knife at his throat, before any of his guards could react. Drop your weapons. Her voice carried clearly across the canyon. Or your boss dies where he stands. The tableau that followed was perfect in its deadly simplicity. Harrington frozen with steel at his throat, his men caught between conflicting orders, and Cole standing in the cemetery with his hands empty but his purpose clear. You heard the lady, Cole called. Drop your weapons and walk away. This is over. For a moment it seemed like the standoff might resolve without further bloodshed. Several of Harrington's men actually began to lower their rifles, recognizing that their employer's situation had become untenable. But Captain Webb had other ideas. Kill them all, he shouted from his position on the south ridge. Harrington's finished anyway, save yourselves. The gunfire that erupted was immediate and devastating. Cole dove behind the Fletcher monument as bullets whined off the granite, scrabbling for his Colt while trying to track the muzzle flashes that lit up the canyon walls like deadly fireworks. On the eastern ridge he could see Aiyana and Harrington locked in a deadly struggle as Webb's shot had spoiled her advantage and given her captive a chance to fight back. She was fast and skilled, but Harrington was larger and desperate, and the outcome of their combat was far from certain. Cole came up shooting his Colt, barking 6 times in rapid succession as he targeted the most immediate threats. 2 of Webb's men cried out and fell, their rifles clattering down the rocky slope, but others were moving to new positions, and the volume of fire directed at the cemetery was intensifying. From the church behind him, Cole could hear the methodical crack of return fire as Morrison and the others provided what support they could. But they were still outnumbered and outgunned, and the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. That was when the unexpected happened. A new voice echoed across the canyon, powerful, authoritative, carrying the unmistakable ring of legitimate authority. "This is Colonel James Mitchell, United States Army, acting under federal orders. Cease fire immediately and surrender your weapons." Cole looked toward the canyon entrance and felt his heart leap with hope. A column of blue uniformed cavalry was pouring into the natural amphitheater, their rifles ready and their intentions clear. At their head rode an officer whose bearing and confidence suggested he was exactly who he claimed to be. The effect on Harrington's men was immediate and decisive. Faced with organized military force rather than desperate civilians, most of them threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Only Captain Webb and a handful of his most loyal followers continued firing, but their resistance was brief and futile against trained soldiers with superior numbers. The battle for the church ended as quickly as it had begun, leaving the canyon floor littered with discarded weapons and the echoes of gunfire slowly fading into the desert silence. Cole holstered his gun and made his way carefully up the slope toward the eastern ridge, where Aiyana was standing over Harrington's unconscious form. She looked up as he approached, and he saw blood on her face from a cut that suggested their struggle had been even more violent than it had appeared from below. "Is he alive?" Cole asked. "Alive but not happy about it." Aiyana kicked Harrington's gun away from his reaching hand. "He'll live to stand trial, which is more than he deserves." Cole knelt beside Harrington and checked for serious injuries, finding nothing worse than a concussion and some bruised ribs. The man who'd terrorized Redemption Valley for 5 years looked smaller in defeat, older and more fragile than his reputation had suggested. "Colonel Mitchell," Cole called to the approaching cavalry officer, "Marshal Morrison is in the church with evidence you'll want to see." Mitchell dismounted and approached with the crisp efficiency of a career soldier. He was younger than Cole had expected, maybe 35, with the kind of weathered competence that suggested extensive frontier experience. "Mr. Banister, I presume. Marshal Morrison has told me quite a bit about you." Mitchell's handshake was firm and brief. "Congratulations on a job well done." "Thank you, sir. Though I have to ask, how did you know to come here?" "Morrison's been filing regular reports with my command for the past 6 months. When he failed to make his scheduled contact yesterday, we assumed something had gone wrong and rode hard to reach you." Mitchell gestured toward his troopers, who were efficiently rounding up prisoners and securing the scene. "Looks like we arrived just in time." Cole looked around the canyon, taking inventory of the aftermath. 2 of Webb's men were dead, several more wounded, but alive. Tom Bradley had taken a bullet through the shoulder, but was conscious and talking. Most importantly, all of their key people had survived: Morrison, Caroline, Diego, Dr. Harrison, and the others who'd risked everything to break Harrington's hold on the valley. "What happens now?" Aiyana asked, helping Harrington to his feet with less gentleness than strictly necessary. "Now we have trials, testimony, and justice," Mitchell replied. "Harrington and his surviving men will face federal charges for their crimes. The evidence Marshal Morrison has collected should be sufficient to convict them and expose the full extent of their criminal network." Caroline Fletcher emerged from the church carrying the flower basket that had concealed her father's evidence, her green eyes bright with tears and triumph. "It's over," she said simply. "It's finally over." But Cole wasn't entirely convinced. Criminal organizations like Harrington's didn't die easily, and there would be other men in other territories who might seek revenge for what had happened here. Still, for the moment, Redemption Valley was free. "There's something else," Colonel Mitchell said, producing an official-looking document from his jacket. "Marshal Morrison has recommended you for a permanent position with federal law enforcement, Mr. Banister. Your actions here have demonstrated exactly the kind of skills and character we need for frontier justice." Cole looked at the offered commission, then at Aiyana, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. The prospect of legitimate authority of using his skills in service of law rather than personal survival was tempting in ways he hadn't expected. "What about her?" he asked, nodding toward his new wife. "What role would she play in such an arrangement?" "That would depend on what she wants," Mitchell replied diplomatically. "The federal government values skilled operatives regardless of their backgrounds." Aiyana stepped closer to Cole, her hand finding his with the same certainty that had characterized their first meeting by the river. "I want whatever allows us to build something together instead of just surviving separately." Cole felt the weight of the federal marshal's badge inside his jacket, the pendant around his neck, and the warm pressure of Aiyana's hand in his. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the future seemed to offer possibilities beyond mere survival. "All right," he said to Colonel Mitchell. "I accept your offer." As the cavalry troopers led their prisoners away and the survivors began the work of cleaning up the aftermath of battle, Cole and Aiyana stood together on the ridge overlooking Redemption Valley. The desert stretched away toward distant mountains, beautiful and harsh and full of promise. "So," Aiyana said quietly, "what do we do now?" "Now we find out if two people who started as ghosts can figure out how to be alive together." Cole squeezed her hand gently. "Think we can manage that?" "I think," Aiyana replied, "we can manage just about anything if we're willing to try." The sun was setting over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to promise better days ahead. Cole Banister had come to Redemption Valley looking for peace and found war instead. But in the end, he'd discovered something more valuable than either the chance to build a life worth living with someone worth sharing it with. The ghosts would always be there, the memories of violence and loss that shaped who he'd become. But perhaps with time and effort and the love of a woman who understood the cost of survival, those ghosts could become something else, reminders not of what he'd lost, but of what he'd learned along the way. Redemption Valley had lived up to its name, not through the absence of conflict, but through the presence of people willing to fight for something better than what they'd inherited. And sometimes in a hard country, full of hard choices, that was enough to make all the difference in the world.